The asteroid that should have carved Earth's greatest wound drifts past in the cosmic dark, a mountain of stone and ice that will never know the blue world it might have shattered. 66 million years ago. This wanderer continues its long orbit around the Sun, carrying with it the extinction that will never come, below, in the warm shallows of what will never be called the Western Interior Seaway. Mosasaurs twist through water that tastes of ancient salt and dissolved limestone. Their powerful tails carve temporary channels in liquid that has known no surface ice for 20 million years. The Cretaceous world exhales its carbon-rich breath into skies unmarked by iridium. Atmospheric carbon dioxide dances at levels that would make future ice sheets impossible. Though no ice sheets will ever form in this timeline's patient unfolding, the greenhouse effect wraps Earth in warmth that penetrates even to polar regions, where dawn redwoods and ginkgos stretch their branches toward a sun that never quite sets during the long summer months. In these high-latitude forests, small theropods with downy feathers hunt insects that have never felt winter's bite. Triceratops herds move like living boulders across flowering plains that stretch beyond every horizon. Their three-horned skulls, each one unique as a snowflake, bob with the rhythm of endless grazing. The grasses they crop will continue evolving for millions of years to come, developing new chemical defences that herbivore digestion will counter with patient adaptation. This is the mathematics of deep time, every innovation answered by counter-innovation, every advantage eventually neutralised by the slow genius of natural selection. Some paleobotanists believe the first true grasses emerged in dinosaur dung, their seeds finding perfect germination conditions in the nitrogen-rich waste of massive herbivores. Whether this is true remains one of science's gentle uncertainties, buried in sediments that formed when continents wore different shapes. What remains certain is that plants and their giant consumers have been locked in evolutionary conversation for over 100 million years, each species teaching the other new ways to survive. The Deccan traps still pulse with volcanic fury, but their poison gases dissipate into an atmosphere already thick with carbon dioxide. What might have been a killing blow becomes merely another geological shrug. Lava flows cool into basalt that will endure long after the mountains above them have worn to sand. In tide pools along newly formed coastlines, tiny marine reptiles hunt creatures that Darwin would never have imagined. Their hunting strategies refined by eons of practice that will never be interrupted. Only a cosmic coincidence allowed this timeline to unfold. Had the asteroid arrived a few thousand years earlier or later, or approached from a slightly different angle, the Cretaceous extinction might have proceeded as scheduled. Instead, gravitational perturbations from Jupiter's massive bulk nudged the impactor's trajectory just enough to ensure it would miss Earth entirely. The mathematics of orbital mechanics, calculated across millions of years, delivered this reprieve with the same indifference that might have delivered catastrophe. In the shallow seas that separate what will never be called North America from its eastern archipelago, marine reptiles have grown comfortable with their dominion. Plesiosaurs with necks longer than telephone poles sweep the water column for schools of ammonites that spiral through liquid medium, like living nautilus shells. Their extinction will never come because their world will never change quickly enough to outpace adaptation. They have time, geological ages of time, to perfect their designs. The absence of one cosmic impact ripples forward through deep time like waves in extremely slow motion. Species that should have vanished persist and diversify. Evolutionary pressures that should have suddenly intensified remain gradual and manageable. The great dying that should have cleared ecological niches for mammals never arrives, leaving those small, furry creatures to remain forever marginal, forever nocturnal, forever waiting for an opportunity that will never come. Somewhere in what will never be called Hell Creek, a tyrannosaur raises her massive skull towards stars that wheel overhead in patterns unchanged for millions of years. Her brain, larger than any mammals will ever become in this timeline, processes sensory information with an efficiency that evolution has had unlimited time to refine. She's not the end of her lineage, but part of its eternal middle, a chapter in a story that will continue writing itself for tens of millions of years to come. The planet's fever-warm climate ensures that ice will never lock away ocean water in continent-sized sheets. Sea levels remain high, keeping the interior of continents flooded with shallow, life-rich waters that serve as nurseries for marine reptiles and highways for their migration. These epicontinental seas will persist as long as the greenhouse atmosphere endures. And the greenhouse atmosphere will endure as long as dinosaur-influenced vegetation continues releasing carbon into the patient air. In forests where conifers have been perfecting their resin chemistry for geological ages. Amber preserves perfect snapshots of insects that buzz between flowers that will never feel frost. Each drop of fossilized sap contains evidence of evolutionary relationships that will continue developing in ways no timeline with an asteroid impact could ever explore. The flowers and their insect partners dance an eternal waltz, each generation teaching the next new steps in choreography that has no final performance. This is how deep time feels when catastrophe keeps its distance, not as dramatic chapters with clear beginnings and endings, but as continuous sentences that run on for millions of years without punctuation. Evolution proceeds by gentle degrees rather than revolutionary leaps. The asteroid that never came allowed Earth to continue a conversation with itself that might have lasted until the sun's own expansion finally ended all terrestrial discussions. Above the peaceful seas and flowering continents, Venus traces its retrograde path across skies that have never been darkened by impact winter. The planet's slow rotation continues marking days and nights, in rhythms that dinosaurs learned to follow over evolutionary timescales no human chronometer could measure. Time itself moves differently here, counted not in moments, but in the patient accumulation of sedimentary layers that will preserve this alternate history in stone. The flowering prairies that stretch beyond every horizon have been teaching dinosaurs new ways to live for 10 million years since the asteroid passed harmlessly by. Angiosperms carpet the continental interiors with colours that shift through seasons unmarked by ice, their petals opening to sun that never dims behind impact dust. In these endless meadows, hadrosaurs move like living lawnmowers, their complex dental batteries grinding through vegetation that has evolved alongside their feeding strategies for geological ages. Each species of duck-billed dinosaur has developed its own relationship with specific plant communities, creating grazing patterns that shape entire ecosystems across thousands of square miles. The grasses that rustle beneath their feet represent one of evolution's quietest revolutions. These simple-looking plants hide extraordinary complexity in their cells, where specialized chemistry allows them to thrive under the constant pressure of herbivore attention. Silicon-strengthened stems resist the shearing forces of dinosaur jaws, while underground root networks store energy in ways that allow rapid regrowth after grazing. Some botanists suspect these grasslands developed their current form specifically in response to hadrosaur feeding behaviour. Though the fossil record remains diplomatically silent on such cause and effect relationships spanning millions of years, ceratopsian herds follow migration routes that their ancestors established when these prairies were still shallow seas. Their massive frilled skulls, decorated with spikes and bosses unique to each species, catch morning light as they move across landscapes that never knew the sudden flowering that followed mass extinction. Without the ecological disruption that should have ended the Cretaceous, plant communities had unlimited time to develop stable relationships with their herbivore partners. The result is a world where predation pressure and defensive chemistry exist in perfect, patient balance. Above the grazing herds, pterosaurs with wingspans broader than city streets ride thermals that rise from sun-warmed grasslands. These flying reptiles have had 66 million years to perfect their aerial mastery, developing navigation abilities that allow them to migrate across continents with precision that would make future birds envious. Their fossil remains, preserved in fine-grained sediments deposited by seasonal floods, suggest wing-loading ratios that push the theoretical limits of powered flight in Earth's thicker atmosphere. The mathematics of photosynthesis work differently here, where carbon dioxide concentrations remain locked at levels that disappeared from our timeline before the first ice age. Plants process atmospheric carbon with an efficiency that creates growth rates measured in geological time. Their stems and trunks expanding with the patience of mountains, tree rings, where they exist at all, record decades rather than single years, marking longer cycles of abundance and scarcity that match astronomical patterns invisible to shorter-lived organisms. In quiet moments between the thunder of passing herds, the prairies reveal their subtler inhabitants, small theropods, their bodies covered in feathers that serve more for display than warmth, hunt insects that have diversified into forms unknown in any future fossil record. These diminutive predators represent evolutionary pathways that mass extinction would have closed forever. Their specialized hunting techniques, refined across tens of millions of uninterrupted years, some have developed relationships with flowering plants, dispersing seeds in exchange for nectar-rich rewards that fuel their high metabolism lifestyles. The absence of sudden environmental change allowed coevolution to proceed at its natural pace. Flowering plants and their dinosaur partners learned each other's needs across timescales that dwarf human comprehension, where future mammals would have required mere thousands of years to adapt to new food sources. Dinosaurs and angiosperms spent millions of years negotiating the terms of their mutual dependence. The result is a world where every plant species has its dinosaur partner, and every dinosaur lineage has been shaped by specific botanical relationships. Underground, the prairie soil tells its own story of patient accumulation. Rootlets and fungal networks create chemical exchanges that have been developing complexity for geological ages. Dinosaur dung, rich in partially digested plant matter, feeds bacterial communities that process nutrients with efficiency unknown in our timeline's more chaotic soil ecosystems. These bacterial partnerships, evolved under stable climatic conditions, create soil chemistry that supports plant communities impossible under more variable environmental conditions. Some geochemists believe the stable isotope signatures in prairie sediments reveal photosynthetic processes that operated under atmospheric conditions that would disappear forever once ice ages began. These chemical traces, preserved in limestone layers deposited by seasonal lakes, suggest that carbon cycling followed patterns completely unknown in our timeline's more dynamic climate history. The greenhouse world allowed biogeochemical processes to achieve equilibrium states that punctuated evolution would never permit. Seasonal patterns flow like slow music across the endless grasslands. Without ice age cycling to disrupt established rhythms, plant communities developed internal clocks calibrated to astronomical forces operating on thousand-year timescales. Flowering sequences follow patterns that match solar radiation cycles, invisible to organisms adapted to more rapid environmental change. Dinosaur migration routes, established across millions of years, follow these botanical calendars with precision that suggests evolutionary fine-tuning impossible under unstable climatic conditions. The herds that move across these flowering prairies carry with them genetic information accumulated across unbroken evolutionary lineages stretching back to the early Cretaceous. Each individual represents not just its own species, but the culmination of adaptive processes that mass extinction would have terminated. Their complex social behaviours, refined across geological ages of gradual environmental change, create herd dynamics that operate like slow-motion choreography across continental landscapes. At night, when the grazing herds settle into rest positions that minimise predation risk, the prairies become stages for displays of bioluminescence that evolution had unlimited time to perfect. Insects pulse with patterns that coordinate mating behaviours across species boundaries. Their chemical communications creating light shows that stretch beyond every horizon. These displays represent evolutionary artistry impossible under the time pressure that catastrophic extinction would have imposed. The same stars that witnessed the Cretaceous extinction in our timeline look down on continuing prosperity here. Constellations wheel overhead in patterns that dinosaur navigation systems learned to follow across millions of years of gradual climate variation. The celestial mechanics that governed migration routes and seasonal behaviours continue operating in this timeline, where sudden change never interrupted the patient accumulation of adaptive wisdom. In this world without asteroid impact, the flowering prairies represent not just habitat, but evolutionary laboratory, where plant-animal relationships had unlimited time to explore every possible variation on themes of mutual dependence and adaptive response. Ice finds no purchase on a world where carbon dioxide breathes through atmosphere thick enough to prevent the crystalline sleep that should have claimed the poles. The greenhouse gases that dinosaurs help maintain, through their plant processing digestive systems, keep global temperatures stable at levels that would melt any ice sheet before it could gain the mass to persist. Where future glaciers might have carved valleys and scraped continents clean, warm rain falls instead, creating river systems that have flowed in the same channels for tens of millions of years without the interruption of glacial damming and redirection. The polar regions, bathed in perpetual warmth, support forests of dawn redwoods and ginkgos that stretch their branches toward a sun that traces lazy circles above the horizon during the endless summer days. These high-latitude woodlands have never felt the bite of permafrost, their soil layers accumulating organic matter in anaerobic conditions that preserve perfect records of plant communities that existed when continents wore different shapes. Small theropods hunt through understories where ferns reach heights impossible under the stress of freeze-thaw cycles that never came to pass. Paleoclimatologists studying sediment cores from this timeline would find isotope signatures that tell stories of thermal stability unknown in our world's more turbulent climate history. The oxygen isotope ratios preserved in marine shells reveal ocean temperatures that varied by only a few degrees across millions of years, creating conditions where marine ecosystems could develop complexity impossible under the thermal stress that ice age cycling would have imposed. Ammonites in these warm seas evolved shell architectures that required thermal stability to maintain their precisely engineered buoyancy systems. The absence of ice age climate forcing allowed ocean currents to establish patterns that persisted across geological ages. Without the disruption of glacial meltwater pulses and sea level fluctuations, thermohaline circulation developed into steady-state configurations that transported heat with efficiency evolution had unlimited time to optimize. These stable current systems created marine climate zones that remained consistent long enough for endemic species to evolve in isolation. Their adaptations fine-tuned to specific temperature and salinity conditions. Continental ice sheets never formed because the atmospheric carbon dioxide concentration remained locked at levels that made ice accumulation thermodynamically impossible. The feedback mechanisms that in our timeline eventually drew carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and allowed glaciation never engaged here, where dinosaur-influenced vegetation continued releasing greenhouse gases into air that maintained its thermal properties across tens of millions of years. This created a world where seasonal temperature variations occurred within ranges that never challenged the survival strategies of large ectothermic reptiles. Some atmospheric chemists believe the stable climate resulted from biological feedback systems that achieved equilibrium states impossible under the disruption that mass extinction would have caused. The complex interactions between dinosaur metabolism, plant respiration, and atmospheric gas exchange reached balance points that self-corrected against perturbations that might have triggered cooling. These biological thermostats, refined across geological ages, maintained planetary temperatures within ranges that supported the continued dominance of reptilian megafauna. Ocean surface temperatures remained warm enough to support marine reptile reproduction in polar seas, where mosasaurs and plesiosaurs established breeding grounds that persisted across millions of years. These high-latitude marine nurseries developed into evolutionary laboratories where cold water adaptations never became necessary, allowing marine reptiles to explore body size, ranges, and feeding strategies impossible under thermal stress. The largest marine reptiles grew to dimensions that would have been unsustainable under the metabolic challenges that colder oceans would have imposed. The thermal stability extended into the deep ocean, where bottom water temperatures remained constant enough to support benthic communities that developed complexity unknown in our timeline's more variable thermal regime. Deep-sea sediments preserve records of productivity cycles that operated on astronomical timescales, their biological rhythms calibrated to orbital variations that could only influence ecosystems under conditions of extreme climatic stability. These deep-time cycles created evolutionary pressures so gentle that species could adapt to them across millions of years. Atmospheric circulation patterns, uncomplicated by the pressure systems that ice sheets would have created, established tradewind configurations that remained stable across geological ages. These consistent wind patterns supported pterosaur migration routes that spanned continents. Their flight paths optimized by natural selection operating over millions of years of unchanging atmospheric conditions. The largest pterosaurs developed wing-loading ratios that took advantage of wind patterns that existed nowhere in our timeline's more chaotic atmospheric dynamics. The warm polar oceans supported phytoplankton communities that achieved species diversity impossible under the thermal shock that glacial cycles would have imposed. These microscopic marine plants developed biochemical pathways optimized for warm water photosynthesis. Their cellular chemistry fine-tuned across geological ages of stable, oceanic conditions. Their fossil remains, preserved in sediments that never knew glacial scouring, record evolutionary experiments in marine primary productivity that mass extinction would have terminated, seasonal patterns, uncomplicated by the chaos that Ice Age climate forcing would have introduced, followed astronomical rhythms with precision that allowed biological systems to calibrate internal clocks to cycles operating on thousand-year timescales. Dinosaur behavioral patterns, shaped by millions of years of stable seasonal variation, achieved synchronization with environmental rhythms impossible under rapidly changing climatic conditions. Their migration timing, breeding cycles, and hibernation patterns reflected evolutionary fine-tuning to atmospheric rhythms that our timeline never sustained long enough to allow such precise biological calibration. The thermal energy that ice sheets would have locked away in crystalline form remained available to power biological processes that operated at efficiencies unknown under colder conditions. Dinosaur metabolism, optimized for warm global temperatures, achieved energy utilization rates that supported active lifestyles at body sizes that would have been unsustainable under thermal stress. Their gigantism represented not just evolutionary possibility, but evolutionary inevitability under conditions where thermal regulation never became the limiting factor for reptilian body size. In this world where ice never claimed the poles, thermal stability created evolutionary opportunities that catastrophic cooling would have closed forever. The patient accumulation of adaptive innovations across millions of years of unchanging climate produced biological systems of complexity impossible under the environmental chaos that our timeline experienced. The greenhouse world allowed life to explore possibilities that punctuated evolution would never have permitted, creating a planet where thermal energy flowed through biological systems with efficiency that approached theoretical limits. Forests rise in cathedral silence where sauropods have been shaping woodland architecture for geological ages, their browsing creating canopy gaps that persist like clearings in a vast green manuscript. The largest herbivores that ever lived continue their patient editing of forest structure, their necks reaching heights that determine which trees survive, to reproduce and which surrender their genetic future to the mathematics of selective pressure. In these dinosaur-curated woodlands, light falls through openings calculated by millions of years of herbivore optimization, creating understory conditions where shade-adapted plants developed strategies unknown in forests shaped by smaller browsers. The biomechanical engineering that allows a creature weighing as much as 12 elephants to raise its head 50 feet above the ground represents evolutionary problem-solving on a scale that mass extinction would have terminated before reaching full expression. Sauropod vertebrae, hollowed by air sacs that reduce skeletal weight without sacrificing structural integrity, demonstrate principles that aeronautical engineers would not discover for another 100 million years. These pneumatic bones, strengthened by internal struts, arranged in patterns that matched theoretical ideals for weight distribution, allowed necks longer than city buses to function as precision feeding apparatus. Each browsing session removes vegetation with surgical precision. The sauropods' peg-like teeth stripping leaves and bark according to feeding strategies refined across tens of millions of years of uninterrupted evolution. The trees they target show adaptations that reveal this ancient partnership, chemical defences calibrated to discourage over-browsing without preventing the moderate predation that maintains forest health. Some paleobotanists suggest that certain tree species developed growth rates specifically timed to recover between sauropod visits. Their reproductive cycles synchronized with herbivore behavior patterns that operated on seasonal timescales. The forest floors beneath these giants accumulate organic matter according to rules established When the first sauropods learned to coordinate their massive digestive systems with plant productivity cycles, dung piles the size of small hills provide nutrients that create soil chemistry capable of supporting tree species that exist nowhere outside these dinosaur-maintained ecosystems. The bacterial communities that process this organic matter have had geological ages to develop decomposition efficiency that approaches thermodynamic limits. Their metabolic pathways optimized for the specific chemical signatures of sauropod waste. Canopy architecture in these forests reflects the reach and feeding preferences of creatures whose heads moved through three-dimensional space, like the business ends of biological cranes. Trees that survived the browsing pressure developed crown shapes that balanced light capture with the need to maintain foliage beyond the reach of even the longest necks. The resulting forest structure, with its precisely distributed gaps and strategically positioned high canopy resources, created light conditions that supported plant communities impossible under different browsing regimes. Some dendrologists believe that certain tree species developed longevity strategies specifically adapted to sauropod-mediated disturbance cycles. Their lifespans calibrated to outlast periods of intensive browsing while taking advantage of the nutrient pulses that giant herbivore waste provided. These trees, with lifespans measured in millennia rather than centuries, represented evolutionary investments in temporal niches that mass extinction would have made unprofitable. Their growth rings, where they exist at all, record not annual cycles, but the longer rhythms of dinosaur population fluctuations across decades or centuries. The acoustic properties of these sauropod-shaped forests created sound environments unlike any that developed in our timeline. The precisely spaced tree trunks and strategically located canopy gaps affected sound propagation in ways that influenced the evolution of dinosaur communication systems. Low-frequency vocalizations, travelling through forest structures optimized by millions of years of herbivore architecture, achieved transmission ranges that allowed these giants to coordinate behavior across distances measured in miles rather than meters. Underground, root systems developed architectures that balanced competition for soil resources with the need to survive the periodic soil disturbance that accompanied sauropod movement. Tree roots in these forests grew in patterns that avoided the zones where giant feet created compression forces sufficient to damage shallow root networks, while taking advantage of the soil aeration that resulted from the footsteps of creatures whose weight exceeded that of modern bulldozers. The resulting root architecture, with its strategic spacing and optimized depth distribution, created below-ground ecosystems that existed nowhere outside sauropod habitats. The herbivore pressure exerted by creatures capable of consuming several tons of vegetation daily drove the evolution of plant defensive chemistry in directions that smaller browsers could never have induced. Trees developed tannin concentrations and alkaloid profiles specifically calibrated to discourage sauropod overbrowsing, while maintaining palatability sufficient to ensure the moderate predation that forest health required. These chemical defenses, refined across geological ages of plant-herbivore coevolution, represented pharmaceutical libraries that mass extinction would have destroyed before they could reveal their therapeutic potentials. Seasonal patterns in these forests followed rhythms established by sauropod migration routes that connected breeding grounds separated by continental distances. When the giants departed for seasonal feeding areas, the forest entered recovery phases that lasted for months or years, their plant communities rebuilding according to succession patterns that incorporated the specific disturbance signature of multi-ton herbivores. When the herds returned, their browsing resumed forest management practices that had been refined across millions of years of evolutionary fine-tuning. The microclimate conditions created by sauropod forest management influenced weather patterns that operated on landscape scales. The precisely distributed canopy gaps affected air circulation in ways that influenced rainfall distribution, creating precipitation patterns that supported plant communities calibrated to the specific moisture regimes that dinosaur browsing made possible. These climate effects, operating across thousands of square miles, represented ecosystem engineering on a scale that no smaller herbivores could have achieved in clearings where sauropods gathered for social activities that paleontologists can only infer from trackway evidence. Soil compaction created conditions that supported unique plant communities adapted to the mechanical stress of visitation by creatures whose footsteps registered on seismographs. These gathering places, used across geological ages, developed into landscape features that influenced regional hydrology and supported endemic species found nowhere outside the influence zones of sauropod social behaviour. The patient browsing that shaped these cathedral forests continued season after season across millions of years, creating woodland ecosystems that achieve stability impossible under the rapid, environmental change that mass extinction would have imposed. In this timeline where giants never departed, the forests they curated represented evolutionary masterpieces of herbivore-plant cooperation, their architecture testament to the creative potential of coevolution given unlimited time to perfect its designs. Small mammals wait in shadows that have sheltered them. For 66 million years since the asteroid failed to clear their reptilian competitors from the daylight world, these furry creatures, no larger than house cats despite geological ages of evolutionary opportunity, continue filling the nocturnal niches that became their evolutionary refuge when dinosaurs claimed dominion over every sunlit habitat. Their eyes, enlarged for gathering starlight and moonglow, reflect the patient amber of creatures whose time never came, because catastrophe kept its distance from their world. The placental mammals that should have inherited the Earth remain forever marginal, their body sizes constrained by predation pressures that mass extinction would have eliminated in our timeline. Tree shrews with brain-to-body ratios approaching those of primitive primates scurry through midnight forests, where their survival depends on avoiding the attention of small theropods whose own nocturnal hunting strategies evolved across millions of years of shared darkness. These mammals developed hearing acuity that could detect the footfalls of feathered predators from distances measured in city blocks, their auditory systems fine-tuned to frequency ranges that revealed approaching danger. Some paleontologists believe that mammalian intelligence evolved specifically as a response to the cognitive arms race with dinosaur predators, whose own intelligence continued developing across geological ages without interruption. The small mammals hiding in burrows beneath dinosaur feet possessed brain architecture optimized for rapid learning and behavioral flexibility. Their neural networks designed for survival in a world where larger, more specialized reptilian brains controlled every major ecological niche. These mammalian minds represented evolutionary potential that would never be tested by the selection pressures that our timeline's mass extinction created. The metabolic strategies that keep these small mammals warm through cool nights require energy expenditures that would be impossible for larger body sizes under the predation regime that dinosaur dominance maintained. Their high-speed metabolisms, evolved for burst locomotion and rapid temperature regulation, achieved efficiency levels that approach thermodynamic limits for creatures operating in the thermal shadow of reptilian giants. Every calorie consumed had to power not just basic survival, but the hypervigilance necessary for existing as prey species in ecosystems dominated by intelligent predators. Underground warrens, excavated across millions of years of continuous occupation, create subterranean cities where mammalian social systems developed complexity invisible to the dinosaur world above. These burrow networks, with their precisely engineered ventilation systems and strategically positioned emergency exits, represent architectural achievements that rival the engineering of social insects. The mammals that constructed these underground refuges possessed spatial navigation abilities that allowed them to maintain mental maps of tunnel systems extending across miles of three-dimensional underground space. Dental evolution in these shadow dwellers followed pathways impossible under the different selection pressures that would have operated after dinosaur extinction. Their teeth, adapted for processing the seeds, nuts, and insects available in nocturnal foraging niches, achieved processing efficiency that extracted maximum nutritional value from food sources ignored by their reptilian competitors. Some lineages developed teeth that could crack nuts with forces exceeding those generated by much larger mammals in our timeline, their jaw mechanics optimized by millions of years of specialization for specific dietary niches. The reproductive strategies of these perpetually small mammals involve gestation periods and offspring care patterns calibrated to minimize vulnerability during the periods when maternal behavior required exposure to predation risk. Litter sizes, birth timing, and weaning schedules reflected evolutionary calculations about the optimal balance between reproductive investment and survival probability in a world where mammalian mothers faced predation pressures that would disappear only after dinosaur extinction. These reproductive adaptations achieved efficiency that approached the theoretical limits for maximizing genetic transmission under constant predation threat. Sensory systems in these nocturnal mammals evolved capabilities that would seem supernatural to creatures living under less intense selection pressure. Some species developed echolocation abilities that allowed navigation through complete darkness. Their ultrasonic calls creating acoustic maps of their environment with resolution that revealed obstacles and prey items smaller than insects. Others evolved chemical detection systems that could identify individual dinosaur species by scent molecules carried on air currents from distances measured in miles. The genetic diversity maintained within these small mammalian populations, despite their restricted body sizes and limited ecological opportunities, represented evolutionary insurance policies against environmental changes that would never come. Their genomes contained developmental programs for larger body sizes and different ecological roles, genetic potentials held in reserve by regulatory mechanisms that would never receive the environmental signals necessary for their expression. This cryptic genetic variation represented evolutionary possibilities that remained forever unexplored in a world where dinosaurs never yielded their ecological dominance. Seasonal activity patterns in these mammals followed lunar and stellar cycles, rather than the solar rhythms that govern dinosaur behavior. Their internal clocks, calibrated to the subtle light variations of nighttime environments, achieved temporal precision that allowed coordination of social activities during the brief periods when darkness provided safety for group behaviors. These circadian adaptations, refined across millions of years of nocturnal living, created temporal niches that operated on completely different schedules from the diurnal world of their reptilian competitors. Social communication systems among these shadow mammals employed frequencies and modalities that remained undetectable to dinosaur sensory systems. Their vocalizations, optimized for transmission through the acoustic environments of dense vegetation and underground tunnels, carried information about territorial boundaries, mate availability, and predator warnings with precision that approached the efficiency of technological communication networks. These communication systems represented evolutionary solutions, the problem of maintaining social cohesion while avoiding detection by intelligent predators. The immune systems of these small mammals, constantly challenged by pathogens encountered in their underground refuges and carrion-rich foraging environments, achieved pathogen resistance that exceeded anything found in larger mammals from our timeline. Their immune responses, calibrated by millions of years of exposure to the diverse microbial communities that thrived in dinosaur-dominated ecosystems, represented biological defenses that would have been unnecessary in a world where mammalian dominance created different pathogen landscapes. In this timeline where daylight belongs forever to reptiles, the small mammals that wait in shadows represent evolutionary roads not taken, their potential constrained by the success of competitors who never faced the asteroid that should have ended their reign. These shadow dwellers embody the patient persistence of life forms, whose time might come only when stars grow cold, and even dinosaurs surrender their ancient dominance to the mathematics of stellar evolution. Ocean giants never yield their liquid dominion to the mammalian usurpers who should have claimed the deep-water throne after the great dying that never came. Mosasaurs with skulls longer than city buses continue their ancient patrol of seaways that have known no whales, their serpentine bodies cutting through water that tastes of Cretaceous salt and dissolved limestone, from reefs that grew when continents wore different names. These marine reptiles, freed from the extinction that should have ended their lineages 66 million years ago, evolved into forms that dwarf the largest creatures that ever lived in our timeline's more constrained oceans. The biomechanical perfection of creatures designed by evolution for three-dimensional movement through liquid medium achieves efficiency that approaches theoretical limits for aquatic locomotion. mosasaur vertebrae, articulated with joints that allow lateral undulation while maintaining structural integrity under pressures that would crush land-dwelling skeletons, demonstrate engineering principles that naval architects would not discover for geological ages. Their propulsion systems, refined across tens of millions of uninterrupted years, generate thrust with muscle configurations that extract maximum kinetic energy from each contraction of swimming muscles larger than small automobiles. Plesiosaurs with necks that stretch longer than subway cars sweep the water column for prey that never learn to fear mammalian predation. Their feeding strategies, developed across geological ages of marine hunting, achieve prey capture rates that approach the thermodynamic limits for converting swimming energy into nutritional intake. The hydrodynamic properties of their paddle-like limbs, optimized by natural selection operating across millions of years of aquatic specialization, create propulsion efficiency that allows pursuit of prey across oceanic distances that exceed the migration ranges of any terrestrial predator. Some marine biologists studying this timeline would find evidence of echolocation systems in the largest mosasaurs, their inner ear structures suggesting acoustic navigation capabilities that evolved in response to hunting pressures in deep ocean environments where visual cues became unreliable. These biological sonar systems, refined across millions of years of aquatic predation, achieved acoustic resolution that could detect prey movements in complete darkness at distances measured in miles rather than meters. The evolution of such sophisticated sensory systems represents adaptive potential that mass extinction would have terminated before reaching full expression. The deep ocean trenches that should have become highways for migrating whales remain the exclusive territory of marine reptiles, whose ancestors survived every extinction event that claimed their terrestrial relatives. These abyssal giants, adapted for hunting in pressurized environments where sunlight never penetrates, developed bioluminescent communication systems that create underwater light shows spanning thousands of square miles. Their chemical illumination, powered by metabolic processes that operate efficiently under crushing pressure, represents biochemical innovation impossible under the selection pressures that rapid environmental change would have imposed. Ocean productivity in these reptile-dominated seas operates according to predator-prey dynamics that achieve stability across geological ages. The absence of sudden ecosystem disruption allowed marine food webs to develop complexity that approaches the theoretical limits for energy transfer efficiency in aquatic systems. Primary productivity, herbivore grazing pressure, and apex predation exist in mathematical relationship so precisely calibrated that seasonal variations in any component trigger compensatory responses that maintain system stability across timescales measured in millions of years. The largest marine reptiles achieve body sizes that require prey, biomass calculations operating on landscape scales. A single adult mosasaur, with metabolic requirements approaching those of small industrial facilities, influences marine ecosystems across oceanic basins through predation pressure that shapes the evolution of everything from microscopic plankton to smaller marine reptiles. These ecological effects, accumulated across geological ages, create selection pressures that operate like slow-motion evolutionary forces sculpting marine communities with precision impossible under more chaotic environmental conditions. Breeding cycles in these marine giants follow astronomical rhythms calibrated to tidal forces and seasonal productivity patterns that remain stable across millions of years. Their reproductive strategies, evolved under consistent oceanic conditions, achieve offspring survival rates that approach theoretical maximums for large marine predators, nursery areas, established in shallow seas that never experienced glacial sea level fluctuations, provide juvenile habitat that remains optimal across geological ages of gradual environmental change. The acoustic properties of these reptile-ruled oceans create underwater soundscapes unlike anything that developed after mammalian marine colonization. Low-frequency calls from creatures with vocal apparatus larger than grand pianos travel across oceanic basins, their sound waves carrying behavioral information that coordinates social activities across distances that span continents. These communication networks, refined across millions of years of marine social evolution, create underwater societies with organizational complexity that exceeds anything found in our timeline's more recently evolved marine mammal communities. Deep-sea sediments in this timeline preserve continuous records of marine reptile evolution that span from the Cretaceous through geological ages that never knew mass extinction. These fossil deposits reveal evolutionary experiments in marine gigantism that mass extinction would have terminated. They're specimens demonstrating adaptive solutions to problems of aquatic existence that mammalian evolution never had the time to explore. The largest specimens suggest body sizes that approach the physical limits for biological structures operating in aquatic environments. Ocean chemistry in these stable marine ecosystems maintains dissolved gas concentrations that support respiratory systems optimized across geological ages for reptilian metabolism in aquatic environments. The absence of rapid climate change allowed marine reptiles to fine-tune their blood chemistry for maximum oxygen extraction from seawater, the hemoglobin variants achieving oxygen carrying capacity that exceeds anything found in air-breathing marine mammals. These biochemical adaptations represent evolutionary solutions to problems of aquatic respiration that were perfected across millions of years of uninterrupted marine specialization. Seasonal migration patterns in these ocean giants follow routes established when the first marine reptiles learned to navigate by celestial cues and magnetic field variations. These ancient highways, used across geological ages, create predictable concentrations of marine biomass that influence everything from plankton distribution to deep-sea scavenging communities. The mathematical precision of these migration patterns, refined across millions of years of navigational optimization, demonstrates biological coordination capabilities that approach the accuracy of technological guidance systems, in abyssal depths where pressure creates environments more alien than outer space. Marine reptiles explore ecological niches that mammalian physiology could never colonize. These deep-sea giants, adapted for hunting in conditions that would instantly crush surface-dwelling creatures, represent evolutionary achievements in high-pressure survival that remained impossible in our timeline's more recently colonized marine environments. Their success in these extreme habitats demonstrates the creative potential of evolution, given unlimited time to solve the most challenging problems of aquatic existence. Continental drift shapes new stages where dinosaur lineages radiate into forms never seen in our timeline. The evolution proceeding across landscapes that emerge from tectonic processes operating with the patience of geological ages. As Pangaea's fragments continue their slow dance across Earth's surface, they carry dinosaur populations into isolation that breeds the kind of evolutionary experimentation that mass extinction would have terminated before reaching full expression. On islands that rise from oceanic depths and continents that split along rift valleys carved by mantle convection. Dinosaurs explore adaptive possibilities that our timeline's catastrophic interruption made forever inaccessible. The mathematics of plate tectonics operates on timescales that allow evolution to respond to geographical change, with precision impossible under more rapid environmental forcing. Mountain ranges that rise at rates measured in millimeters per year create elevation gradients that dinosaur populations climb across millions of years, their body sizes and metabolic rates adjusting to atmospheric pressure and temperature changes with evolutionary patience that approaches perfection. These slow-motion adaptations, calibrated to match the pace of tectonic uplift, produce highland dinosaur communities that exist nowhere in fossil records, truncated by sudden extinction. Island biogeography in this timeline reveals evolutionary experiments that continental populations never attempt. Sauropods stranded on volcanic islands that emerge from oceanic spreading centers develop body sizes calibrated to food resources limited by geological isolation. Some lineages shrink to dimensions approaching those of modern elephants, their reduced stature representing evolutionary solutions to resource constraints that operated across millions of years of isolated evolution. Others elongate their necks to extreme proportions, reaching feeding heights that allow exploitation of vegetation resources unavailable to more conventionally proportioned herbivores. The Tethys Sea, as it contracts through the collision of Africa with Europe, creates an archipelago of islands where marine and terrestrial dinosaurs experiment with amphibious lifestyles that continental evolution never explored. These island chains, emerging and submerging according to sea level fluctuations driven by tectonic activity, support dinosaur populations that develop swimming abilities and semi-aquatic feeding strategies. Their bone density, modified across geological ages of aquatic selection pressure, achieves buoyancy control that allows efficient movement through both terrestrial and marine environments. Some paleontologists studying this timeline would discover evidence of flight evolution in dinosaur lineages isolated on continents that drifted into high-latitude positions. The seasonal light variations experienced during polar night and midnight sun created selection pressures that favoured aerial mobility in small theropods, whose feathers evolved from insulation toward lift generation. These flying dinosaurs, developing independently from the pterosaur lineages that continued their own evolutionary trajectories, demonstrate convergent evolution in action across geographical scales impossible to study in our timeline's abbreviated fossil record. Rift Valley systems, carved by tectonic forces that operate with geological persistence, create linear habitats where dinosaur migration routes follow the topography of continental splitting. The East African Rift, as it widens across millions of years, supports dinosaur populations that specialize for movement through narrow corridors of optimal habitat, separated by increasingly challenging terrain. These linear ecosystems, maintained by tectonic processes operating on timescales that match evolutionary adaptation rates, create unique selection pressures that produce dinosaur communities adapted for life along geographical boundaries. The collision zones where continents converge create mountain-building episodes that unfold across timescales, allowing dinosaur populations to track optimal elevation zones as they rise toward the sky. The Himalayas, as they achieve heights that exceed modern elevations, support dinosaur communities adapted for life in atmospheric conditions, approaching those found at commercial aircraft cruising altitudes. These high-altitude specialists develop respiratory systems and metabolic rates that function efficiently in thin air, their adaptations representing solutions to environmental challenges that our timeline's sea-level adapted dinosaurs never encountered. Volcanic island chains, emerging from hotspot activity that operates independently of continental drift patterns, create stepping stone habitats that support dinosaur dispersal across oceanic distances. Small theropods with enhanced swimming abilities colonize these volcanic islands, their populations undergoing rapid speciation as they adapt to the unique ecological conditions found on newly formed land masses. The geological youth of these islands, measured in thousands rather than millions of years, creates evolutionary pressures that operate at accelerated rates compared to continental adaptation patterns. Continental breakup events create vicariant speciation opportunities that divide dinosaur populations along geological boundaries that persist for millions of years. The separation of South America from Africa isolates dinosaur communities on continents that drift toward different climate zones, their evolution proceeding independently toward adaptations that reflect the environmental conditions encountered during continental wandering. These isolated populations develop morphological and behavioral differences that accumulate across geological ages of separation, creating diversity patterns that continental dinosaurs never achieved. Transform fault systems, where tectonic plates slide past each other with grinding persistence, create linear zones of geological instability that support dinosaur communities specialized for life along active fault traces. These seismically active environments, with their frequent earthquakes and associated geological disturbances, select for dinosaur behavioral patterns and skeletal adaptations that provide survival advantages during ground motion events. The resulting populations develop enhanced spatial awareness and structural modifications that allow rapid response to seismic activity. Seafloor spreading centers, as they create new oceanic crust through volcanic activity that continues for millions of years, generate heat flux patterns that influence regional climate in ways that shape dinosaur evolution on nearby continental margins. Coastal dinosaur populations, influenced by oceanic warming effects that operate on geological timescales, develop heat tolerance and seasonal behavior patterns that reflect their adaptation to geothermally influenced climate conditions. These populations represent evolutionary responses to environmental forcing that operates through tectonic rather than atmospheric mechanisms. The patient operation of tectonic processes across timescales that match evolutionary rates creates geographical laboratories where dinosaur adaptation proceeds with precision impossible under rapid environmental change. Continental positions, elevation patterns, and climate zones shift at rates that allow evolutionary tracking of optimal conditions across geological ages. This creates a dynamic equilibrium between geological forcing and biological response that produces dinosaur diversity patterns reflecting the full creative potential of evolution, operating without catastrophic interruption. In this world where continents drift and dinosaurs follow, tectonic processes and biological adaptation achieve synchronization that creates landscapes populated by creatures perfectly suited to the geological stages on which they perform their evolutionary experiments. The patient pace of continental drift provides the temporal framework within which dinosaur evolution explores every possibility that catastrophic extinction would have foreclosed. The great drying begins as climate shifts toward aridity favour smaller dinosaurs, their reduced body sizes representing evolutionary solutions to water scarcity that operates across timescales measured in millions of years rather than decades. Global precipitation patterns, responding to continental configurations that place land masses in rain shadow positions relative to prevailing wind systems, create selection pressures that reward efficiency over gigantism in dinosaur communities that must extract maximum survival value from increasingly precious water resources. The sauropods that once dominated humid forests find their massive water requirements incompatible with landscapes where every drop becomes currency and biological economies calibrated for scarcity. Miniaturization trends across multiple lineages demonstrate convergent evolution operating on continental scales, with herbivorous dinosaurs developing body sizes that optimize the relationship between metabolic water production and environmental water loss. Ceratopsians shrink to dimensions approaching those of modern sheep, their reduced bulk allowing survival on vegetation with lower moisture content, while maintaining the defensive capabilities that their armour and horns provide against predators who face identical water stress. These smaller herbivores develop behavioural patterns that concentrate activity during periods when atmospheric humidity reaches levels sufficient to reduce respiratory water loss. The physiological adaptations that allow desert survival in creatures descended from ancestors who evolved in tropical abundance represent evolutionary problem-solving that approaches biochemical perfection. Dinosaur kidneys, modified across geological ages of increasing aridity, achieve urine concentration levels that exceed those found in any modern desert animal. Their nephron architecture, optimized through millions of years of water-conserving natural selection, demonstrates filtration efficiency that extracts maximum nutritional value while minimizing water loss to waste elimination processes. Some paleophysiologists studying this timeline would find evidence of countercurrent heat exchange systems in desert dinosaurs, their blood vessel arrangements creating cooling mechanisms that operate without water evaporation. These circulatory adaptations evolved in response to selection pressures that operated across millions of years of progressive aridification, achieve thermoregulation efficiency that allows maintenance of optimal body temperatures while conserving every molecule of metabolic water production. The resulting physiological systems represent evolutionary engineering that approaches thermodynamic ideals for desert survival. Behavioral water conservation strategies develop complexity that rivals the social organization of colonial insects. Small theropods establish communal roosting sites in locations where geological features create microclimates with elevated humidity levels during specific periods of daily temperature cycling. These behavioral adaptations, refined across geological ages of arid adapted evolution, demonstrate social cooperation that maximizes individual survival probability while minimizing competition for scarce water resources. Their roosting site selection follows environmental cues so subtle that they require sensory capabilities evolved specifically for detecting microscopic variations in atmospheric moisture content. The plant communities that co-evolve with these drought-adapted dinosaurs develop water storage and conservation strategies that create mutualistic relationships impossible under more humid conditions. Succulent plants, Their tissues modified for maximum water retention, provide both nutrition and hydration to herbivorous dinosaurs, whose digestive systems evolve complementary adaptations for extracting moisture from vegetation with water content approaching that of dried grains. These plant-herbivore partnerships, refined across millions of years of mutual water stress, achieve resource utilization efficiency that approaches the theoretical limits for biological water cycling in arid environments. Reproductive strategies in water-stressed dinosaur populations involve timing mechanisms that synchronize breeding activities with seasonal precipitation patterns that operate on astronomical timescales. Egg-laying schedules follow rainfall predictions based on environmental cues that reflect climatic cycles operating across decades or centuries. Their reproductive success dependent on evolutionary adaptations that can anticipate water availability across temporal scales that exceed individual lifespans. These long-term breeding strategies represent biological forecasting capabilities that approach the accuracy of meteorological prediction systems. Underground water access becomes the determining factor in dinosaur territorial behavior, with competing populations establishing hierarchies based on proximity to geological features that provide reliable groundwater access. Small carnivorous dinosaurs develop digging abilities that allow excavation of water sources from depths approaching those accessed by modern well-drilling technology. Their fossorial adaptations, evolved across geological ages of competition for subsurface water resources, demonstrate limb modifications and claw architecture optimized for efficient soil excavation while maintaining the locomotor capabilities necessary for surface predation. The acoustic properties of arid environments create communication challenges that drive evolution of vocalization systems adapted for sound transmission through dry air with minimal moisture content. Desert dinosaurs develop call frequencies and modulation patterns that maximize transmission distance while minimizing the metabolic water cost of vocal production. These communication systems, optimized through millions of years of arid-adapted social evolution, achieve information transfer efficiency that allows coordination of group activities across landscape scales, while conserving respiratory moisture that more humid-adapted vocalizations would waste. Migration patterns in these drought-adapted populations follow seasonal water availability cycles that operate on geographical scales spanning continents. Dinosaur populations develop navigation abilities that allow tracking of optimal habitat zones as they shift in response to astronomical climate forcing operating across timescales that match continental-scale precipitation pattern variations. These migration routes, established across millions of years of arid-adapted behavior evolution, create predictable concentrations of biological activity that influence entire ecosystem structures across semi-arid and desert regions. Metabolic water production in small dinosaurs achieves efficiency levels that approach the biochemical limits for extracting moisture from food sources with minimal water content. Their digestive systems, modified through geological ages of water-conserving selection pressure, demonstrate cellular architecture that maximizes metabolic water yield while minimizing the water requirements for processing increasingly dry vegetation. These physiological adaptations represent evolutionary solutions to survival challenges that operate at the molecular level of biological organization. Seasonal activity patterns in arid-adapted dinosaurs follow lunar cycles rather than solar rhythms. Their behavioral patterns optimized for periods when atmospheric humidity reaches levels that allow increased surface activity without excessive water loss. These circadian adaptations, calibrated across millions of years of desert living, create temporal activity niches that operate on completely different schedules from their humid-adapted ancestors. Their internal chronometers achieve precision that allows coordination of social behaviors during brief periods when environmental conditions permit energy expenditure for activities beyond basic survival. The patient process of aridification, operating across geological timescales that allow evolutionary adaptation to track changing precipitation patterns, creates landscapes populated by dinosaur communities that represent the full creative potential of natural selection operating under water stress. In this world where the great drying proceeds without catastrophic interruption, dinosaur evolution explores every possible solution to the fundamental challenge of extracting life from landscapes where water becomes the limiting factor for biological abundance. Grasses whisper new possibilities across expanding grasslands that support diverse ornithopod communities, their blade-like leaves creating acoustic environments where the wind carries information that herbivorous dinosaurs learned to interpret across millions of years of prairie evolution. The rustling symphonies that emerge from these endless meadows encode seasonal signals, predator warnings, and resource availability data in frequencies that duck-billed dinosaurs process through auditory systems refined by geological ages of grassland living. Each species of hadrosaur develops unique acoustic signatures that allow identification of herd composition from distances measured in miles. Their complex vocalizations harmonizing with grass-generated sounds to create communication networks spanning continental landscapes. The co-evolutionary relationship between grasses and their dinosaur grazers achieves precision that approaches mathematical perfection in resource utilization and regeneration cycles. Ornithopod dental batteries, with their hundreds of precisely arranged teeth that self-sharpen through use, process grass blades with efficiency that extracts maximum nutritional value while stimulating regrowth patterns that maintain prairie productivity across seasonal cycles. These grinding mechanisms, perfected across tens of millions of years of grass processing evolution, demonstrate biomechanical engineering principles that achieve wear resistance and cutting efficiency impossible to duplicate with non-biological materials. Predator-prey dynamics in these grassland ecosystems operate according to mathematical relationships that remain stable across geological ages. Large theropods develop hunting strategies specifically adapted to open-country pursuit of herbivores, whose escape behaviors evolved complementary responses to predation pressure that never experience sudden disruption. The resulting arms race between pursuit and evasion achieves equilibrium states that create selection pressures operating with consistency impossible under rapidly changing environmental conditions. These predator adaptations include enhanced visual acuity for detecting prey movement across distances that span landscape scales, and cardiovascular systems optimize for sustained high-speed locomotion across terrain that offers minimal concealment. Some paleontologists believe that certain ornithopod species developed primitive agriculture, their trampling and waste deposition patterns creating grass cultivation systems that operated across seasonal cycles spanning multiple generations. These proto-agricultural behaviors, if they existed, would represent cognitive achievements that mass extinction terminated before they could develop into full domestication relationships. The mathematical precision required for such resource management suggests intelligence levels that approach those found in modern agricultural societies, though the fossil evidence remains diplomatically ambiguous about the extent of dinosaur land management capabilities. The seasonal migration patterns that connect grassland feeding areas with forest breeding grounds create biological highways that influence vegetation patterns across continental distances. Ornithopod herds, following routes established when their ancestors first learned to exploit the expanding grass ecosystems, transport seeds and nutrients between biomes in quantities that affect plant community composition across landscape scales. Their digestive systems, optimized for grass processing but capable of handling diverse vegetation types, serve as biological seed dispersal mechanisms that maintain genetic connectivity between isolated plant populations separated by hundreds of miles underground. The root systems of grasses that co-evolved with dinosaur grazing develop architectures that balance soil stabilization with the need to survive trampling by creatures whose footsteps register as minor seismic events. These root networks, extending to depths that exceed those found in ungrazed grasslands, create soil chemistry that supports bacterial communities specialized for processing the specific nutrient signatures of ornithopod waste. The resulting soil ecosystems achieve productivity levels that approach the theoretical limits for biological primary production in temperate grassland environments. The acoustic properties of grasslands create unique challenges for dinosaur communication systems that operate across open terrain where sound travels without the filtering effects of forest vegetation. Hadrosaur vocalizations evolved for transmission across distances that span multiple time zones, achieve acoustic efficiency that approaches the physical limits for biological sound production. Their cranial crests, modified into resonating chambers with internal architectures rivaling those of musical instruments, generate low-frequency calls that travel across grassland landscapes with minimal signal degradation across distances measured in hundreds of miles. Thermal regulation in open grassland environments requires physiological adaptations that balance heat dissipation with water conservation under solar radiation intensities that forest-dwelling dinosaurs never encountered. Large ornithopods develop behavioural thermoregulation strategies that include coordinated herd movements designed to create shade patterns that protect individuals from excessive heat exposure while maintaining group cohesion necessary for predator defence. These social thermoregulation behaviours, refined across millions of years of grassland adaptation, demonstrate collective problem-solving abilities that approach those found in colonial organisms. The visual systems of grassland-adapted dinosaurs achieve resolution and motion detection capabilities that exceed those of any forest-dwelling species. Their eyes, modified across geological ages of open country living, process visual information with acuity that allows detection of predator movement across distances that approach the horizon limit for ground-based observation. These visual adaptations include specialized retinal architectures that enhance contrast sensitivity for detecting camouflage predators against grass backgrounds, and neural processing systems that filter wind-induced grass movement from the motion signatures that indicate approaching threats. Seasonal patterns in these grassland ecosystems follow astronomical rhythms that operate on timescales matching the orbital variations that influence continental-scale precipitation cycles. Grass growth patterns, synchronized across thousands of square miles, create waves of optimal foraging conditions that move across the landscape like slow-motion green tsunamis. Dinosaur populations that learn to track these productivity waves across geological ages achieve foraging efficiency that approaches the theoretical optimum for herbivore energy acquisition in seasonally variable environments. The chemical ecology of grassland plants develops complexity that rivals pharmaceutical libraries in the diversity of compounds designed to influence dinosaur behavior and physiology. Different grass species produce alkaloids, terpenes, and phenolic compounds that affect dinosaur digestion, reproduction, and neural function in ways that create plant-herbivore relationships operating at the molecular level of biological organization. These chemical communication systems, refined across millions of years of coevolution, achieve precision in biological messaging that approaches the specificity of modern pharmaceutical interventions. Wind patterns in these expansive grasslands create atmospheric circulation systems that transport chemical signals across continental distances. Dinosaur populations develop olfactory capabilities that allow detection of grass pheromones and seasonal chemical changes from sources located beyond the visual horizon. These chemical communication networks, operating through atmospheric transport mechanisms, create information distribution systems that coordinate biological activities across geographical scales that exceed those found in any forest ecosystem. In this world where grasses whisper evolutionary possibilities across endless prairies, the expanding grasslands represent laboratories where plant-herbivore relationships explore adaptive solutions impossible under the temporal constraints that mass extinction would have imposed. The patient coevolution of grasses and their dinosaur partners creates ecosystems that achieve stability and productivity levels approaching the theoretical limits for biological resource utilization in open country environments. Volcanic chains write history across landscapes where the Deccan Traps and other igneous provinces pulse with geological fury that causes regional extinctions, but never the global collapse that should have ended the Mesozoic world. Lava flows, emerging from rifts that split continents along lines dictated by mantle convection patterns operating on timescales that dwarf biological generations, create temporary barriers that fragment dinosaur populations without eliminating entire lineages. These volcanic episodes, intense enough to alter regional climate patterns for thousands of years, demonstrate Earth's capacity for violence that stops just short of planetary catastrophe, allowing life to recover and adapt rather than simply surrender to geological forces beyond biological resistance. The sulfur compounds released during major volcanic events create atmospheric chemistry that challenges but does not overwhelm the respiratory systems of creatures whose ancestors survived smaller volcanic episodes across millions of years of gradual adaptation. Dinosaur populations developed tolerance for atmospheric conditions that would prove lethal to organisms without evolutionary experience of volcanic stress, their hemoglobin variants and respiratory architectures achieving oxygen extraction efficiency under gas concentrations that approach the limits of biological survivability. These physiological adaptations, refined through generations of selection pressure from periodic volcanic activity, represent evolutionary solutions to environmental challenges that operate at the intersection of geology and biology. The Deccan traps, as they pour millions of cubic miles of basalt across what will never be called India, create environmental conditions that test the limits of dinosaur adaptability without exceeding them. Atmospheric loading with particulates that reduce solar radiation for decades or centuries selects for behavioral and physiological modifications that allow survival during periods of reduced primary productivity. Dinosaur populations that survive these volcanic winters develop metabolic flexibility that allows switching between high-activity and low-activity physiological states according to environmental conditions that fluctuate on timescales measured in decades rather than seasons. Some volcanologists studying this timeline would find evidence of dinosaur behavioral adaptations that include migration away from volcanically active regions during periods of increased seismic activity. These migration patterns, developed across millions of years of experience with volcanic cycles, demonstrate predictive capabilities that approach those of modern geological monitoring systems. Dinosaur populations appear to possess sensory systems capable of detecting precursory signals that indicate approaching volcanic events, their behavioral responses suggesting awareness of geological processes operating on timescales that exceed individual lifespans. The ash deposits that accumulate during major volcanic episodes create soil chemistry that supports unique plant communities adapted to the mineral compositions that volcanic activity provides. These volcanically fertilized ecosystems develop into some of the most productive terrestrial habitats ever documented, their plant biomass supporting dinosaur populations with diversity and abundance levels that exceed those found in non-volcanic regions. The periodic soil enrichment that volcanic activity provides creates pulse productivity cycles that dinosaur evolution learns to exploit through behavioral and reproductive strategies calibrated to volcanic periodicity. Regional climate modification during volcanic episodes creates selection pressures that operate on geographical scales spanning continents. Dinosaur populations experience temperature reductions and precipitation pattern changes that persist for periods measured in centuries. Their survival dependent on adaptive flexibility that allows tracking of suitable habitat zones as they shift in response to volcanically induced climate variation. These climate tracking behaviors, developed across geological ages of volcanic adaptation, create migration patterns that connect regions separated by thousands of miles of volcanically modified landscape. The toxic gas emissions associated with major volcanic events select for detoxification capabilities in dinosaur liver and kidney systems that approach those found in organisms specifically adapted for high-toxin environments. These physiological adaptations allow survival during periods when atmospheric chemistry becomes incompatible with normal metabolic processes, their biochemical pathways achieving poison processing efficiency that would seem supernatural to organisms lacking evolutionary experience with volcanic toxicity. The resulting physiological systems represent biological solutions to chemical challenges that operate at the molecular level of survival. Volcanic island formation creates new land surfaces that dinosaur populations colonize during periods between major eruptions. Their rapid dispersal across oceanic distances demonstrating both behavioral flexibility and physiological tolerance for the environmental extremes that volcanic landscapes provide. These colonization events, documented in fossil assemblages found on volcanic islands of various geological ages, reveal dinosaur communities that develop endemic characteristics within timeframes measured in thousands rather than millions of years. The accelerated evolution that occurs on newly formed volcanic substrates creates diversity patterns that continental evolution never achieves. The cyclical nature of volcanic activity creates environmental rhythms that dinosaur populations learn to anticipate across timescales that span multiple generations. Reproductive cycles, territorial behaviours, and resource storage strategies develop synchronization with volcanic periodicity that operates on scales ranging from decades to millennia. These long-term behavioral adaptations demonstrate cognitive capabilities that include temporal pattern recognition across timescales that exceed direct individual experience, suggesting social learning and cultural transmission of environmental knowledge across dinosaur generations. Geothermal features associated with volcanic regions create microhabitat conditions that support dinosaur communities adapted for life in thermally extreme environments. Hot springs, fumaroles, and geothermally heated soils provide habitat zones where temperature-sensitive species find refuge during periods of volcanically induced cooling. Their survival dependent on behavioral adaptations that allow exploitation of geological heat sources. These thermal refugia, maintained by volcanic activity across geological ages, support evolutionary experiments in high-temperature adaptation that create dinosaur lineages found nowhere outside volcanically active regions. The mineral-rich water sources that emerge from volcanic terrains provide essential nutrients that support dinosaur bone growth and metabolic processes in ways that non-volcanic environments cannot duplicate. Dinosaur populations that inhabit volcanically active regions achieve body sizes and bone densities that exceed those found in populations restricted to non-volcanic habitats. Their enhanced mineral nutrition creating physiological advantages that demonstrate the beneficial aspects of geological violence. These mineral supplementation effects, accumulated across lifespans measured in decades, create population characteristics that distinguish volcanically adapted dinosaurs from their non-volcanic relatives. Recovery patterns following major volcanic episodes reveal ecosystem resilience that operates through biological mechanisms refined across millions of years of volcanic experience. Plant communities re-establish themselves according to succession patterns that incorporate the specific disturbance signatures of volcanic activity. Their recovery trajectories creating habitat conditions that returning dinosaur populations recognize and exploit with efficiency approaching ecological optimality. These post-volcanic recovery processes demonstrate biological adaptability that transforms geological destruction into evolutionary opportunity. In this world where volcanic chains write geological history without ending biological stories, the episodic violence of Earth's internal heat creates environmental challenges that strengthen rather than eliminate the dinosaur lineages that learn to survive planetary fever episodes. The patient recovery that follows each volcanic crisis demonstrates life's capacity for adaptation to geological forces operating on timescales that match evolutionary response capabilities. Intelligence flickers in feathered minds where advanced theropods develop complex social behaviors and tool use that approaches but never quite reaches human-level cognition. Their neural architectures exploring cognitive possibilities that mass extinction would have terminated before achieving full expression. In forest clearings, where dromaeosaurids gather for social activities that paleontologists can only infer from trackway evidence, behavioral complexity emerges that rivals that found in modern primate communities. Their problem-solving abilities, refined across tens of millions of years of uninterrupted cognitive evolution, demonstrate mental flexibility that allows adaptation to environmental challenges through learned rather than purely instinctive responses. The cranial capacity of the largest theropods suggests brain volumes that approach those found in early hominids, though their neural organization follows evolutionary pathways completely independent from mammalian cognitive development. These dinosaur brains, with their enlarged cerebral regions and specialized sensory processing areas, achieve information integration capabilities that support behaviors requiring abstract reasoning and temporal planning across extended time horizons. Some paleontologists believe certain theropod species developed primitive language systems, their vocalizations carrying semantic content that exceeded the simple emotional and territorial communications found in most animal species. Tool use among these intelligent theropods extends beyond simple stick manipulation to include modification of natural objects for specific functional purposes. Fossil evidence suggests that certain dromaeosaurid populations shaped stones into cutting implements and used plant fibers to construct simple carrying devices. These tool technologies, developed across geological ages of cognitive advancement, represent the earliest stages of material culture that might have developed into technological sophistication, given unlimited evolutionary time. Their ability to recognize the functional properties of materials and modify them to serve specific purposes demonstrates cognitive capabilities that approach those found in early human tool-making cultures. Social hunting strategies and pack-hunting theropods achieve coordination complexity that requires individual cognitive abilities capable of understanding group tactics and predicting the behavior of both prey and hunting partners. These cooperative behaviors, refined across millions of years of social evolution, demonstrate communication systems that allow real-time coordination of complex group activities across spatial scales spanning multiple square miles. The fossil trackways that preserve evidence of coordinated theropod hunts reveal movement patterns that suggest tactical planning and role specialization within hunting groups. Some cognitive ethologists studying this timeline would find evidence of cultural transmission in theropod populations, their behavioral innovations spreading through social learning mechanisms that operate across multiple generations. These cultural evolution processes, documented in regional variations of tool use and hunting strategies, suggest cognitive capabilities that include imitation, teaching, and the preservation of acquired knowledge through social rather than genetic inheritance mechanisms. The resulting behavioral diversity between geographically separated populations exceeds what purely genetic evolution could produce within the timeframes documented in the fossil record. The problem-solving abilities demonstrated by captive theropods in hypothetical cognitive testing scenarios suggest mental capabilities that include causal reasoning, spatial mapping, and temporal sequencing abilities that rival those found in modern corvids and primates. Their performance on tasks requiring multi-step problem-solving and tool modification indicates cognitive flexibility that approaches the threshold levels associated with technological development in human evolutionary history. These mental capabilities, developed across geological ages of cognitive selection pressure, represent neural achievements that mass extinction eliminated before they could reach their full potential. Communication systems among intelligent theropods involve multimodal signaling that combines vocalizations, visual displays, and chemical markers in ways that create information transfer capabilities approaching those found in human proto-language. Their ability to convey abstract concepts such as temporal relationships, spatial locations beyond direct sensory range, and hypothetical future events suggests cognitive architectures capable of symbolic representation and reference to non-present entities. These communication advances, refined across millions of years of social evolution, demonstrate mental capabilities that transcend simple stimulus-response behavioral patterns. Territorial behaviors in these advanced theropods include the construction of environmental modifications that serve both defensive and communicative functions. Their manipulation of landscape features to create territorial boundaries and resource caching sites demonstrates planning abilities that operate across seasonal cycles and spatial scales that exceed immediate sensory range. These environmental engineering projects, preserved in geological formations that document theropod habitat modification, suggest cognitive capabilities that include mental mapping of territory boundaries and resource distribution patterns across extensive geographical areas. The social hierarchies that develop within theropod groups involve recognition systems that allow individual identification and relationship tracking across extended social networks containing hundreds of individuals. Their ability to maintain stable dominance relationships and alliance patterns across multi-generational timeframes suggests memory capabilities and social intelligence that approach those found in modern elephant societies. These complex social systems, documented in fossil assemblages that preserve evidence of theropod group living arrangements, demonstrate cognitive achievements in social coordination that exceeded anything found in contemporary non-dinosaur species, Parental care behaviours in intelligent theropods extend beyond simple nest protection to include active teaching of hunting techniques, tool use methods, and social protocols that offspring must master to achieve successful integration into adult social groups. These extended learning periods, documented in fossil evidence of prolonged juvenile-adult associations, suggest cognitive development processes that require years or decades to complete. The resulting behavioural complexity in adult theropods reflects cognitive capabilities that approach those associated with cultural species in modern ecosystems. Play behaviours observed in hypothetical theropod populations suggest cognitive capabilities that include simulation, experimentation, and skill development through non-survival critical activities. Their engagement in complex social games and individual exploration behaviours indicates mental capabilities that extend beyond immediate survival requirements to include curiosity-driven learning and creative problem-solving. These play patterns, refined across millions of years of cognitive evolution, demonstrate neural flexibility that creates the foundation for technological development given sufficient evolutionary time. The artistic behaviours that some paleontologists suspect in certain theropod species include environmental arrangements that serve no obvious survival function, but demonstrate aesthetic sensibilities and creative expression capabilities. Their manipulation of colourful objects, construction of symmetrical patterns, and creation of acoustic compositions suggest cognitive capabilities that include appreciation for abstract beauty and creative expression through nonverbal media. These proto-artistic behaviours, if they existed, would represent the earliest stages of aesthetic culture that technological species eventually develop. Memory systems in these advanced theropods achieve information storage and retrieval capabilities that allow individual recognition across extended time periods, spatial navigation across continental distances, and behavioural learning that accumulates across entire lifespans. Their cognitive maps include not only geographical information, but also temporal patterns, social relationships, and resource availability cycles that operate on astronomical timescales. These memory capabilities, refined across geological ages of cognitive selection, represent neural achievements that approach the information processing requirements for technological development. In this world where intelligence flickers in minds that evolution had unlimited time to refine, theropod cognitive capabilities represent alternative pathways to technological potential that catastrophic extinction prevented from reaching their ultimate expression. Their neural achievements demonstrate the creative potential of cognitive evolution operating without temporal constraints. Polar forests hold their breath through seasons where midnight sun and polar night create rhythms unknown to temperate dinosaur communities. They're high-latitude woodlands supporting unique evolutionary experiments that operate under light conditions, approaching those found on alien worlds. In these Arctic and Antarctic refugia, where dawn redwoods and monkey puzzles stretch their branches toward a sun that traces endless circles above horizons unmarked by ice. Small theropods develop behavioural patterns calibrated to photoperiods that extend across months rather than hours. Their internal chronometers, evolved across millions of years of polar adaptation, achieve synchronization with astronomical rhythms that operate on timescales matching planetary orbital mechanics. The physiological adaptations required for survival during polar night create metabolic strategies that approach hibernation without achieving the complete metabolic shutdown that true hibernation requires. These polar dinosaurs develop fat storage capabilities and reduced activity physiological states that allow survival during periods when photosynthesis becomes impossible and food resources disappear beneath seasonal snow accumulations that persist for months at a time. Their metabolic flexibility, refined across geological ages of polar living, demonstrates biochemical engineering that achieves energy conservation efficiency approaching theoretical limits for active organisms in extreme photoperiod environments. Some paleontologists believe that certain polar dinosaur species developed enhanced night vision capabilities that allowed visual hunting during polar night conditions, their retinal modifications creating light sensitivity that exceeded anything found in temperate species. These visual adaptations would include enlarged eyes, specialized rhodopsin chemistry, and neural processing systems optimized for extracting visual information from starlight and aurora illumination. The resulting visual systems would represent evolutionary achievements in low-light adaptation that approached the capabilities found in deep-sea organisms adapted for aphotic environments. The plant communities that support these polar dinosaur populations achieve productivity levels that concentrate photosynthetic activity into the brief periods when solar elevation angles provide sufficient radiation for effective carbon fixation. These compressed growing seasons create vegetation cycles that produce massive biomass accumulation during summer months, followed by extended dormancy periods that test the survival capabilities of herbivorous dinosaurs, whose food resources disappear for months at a time. The resulting plant-herbivore relationships operate according to temporal dynamics unknown in lower latitude ecosystems. Behavioral thermoregulation in polar environments requires social coordination strategies that include communal denning and synchronized activity patterns designed to maximize heat conservation during periods of extreme cold. Large herbivorous dinosaurs develop huddling behaviors that create thermal microclimates within group aggregations. Their collective body heat maintaining temperatures sufficient for survival during weather conditions that would prove lethal to isolated individuals. These social thermoregulation strategies, refined across millions of years of polar adaptation, demonstrate collective problem-solving capabilities that approach those found in colonial organisms. The acoustic properties of polar environments during different seasons create unique challenges and opportunities for dinosaur communication systems. Sound transmission through cold, dense air during polar night achieves propagation distances that exceed those possible under temperate conditions, while the acoustic absorption properties of snow and vegetation create seasonal variations in communication range that require behavioral adaptations. Polar dinosaur vocalizations, evolved for transmission under these variable acoustic conditions, achieve frequency modulations and temporal patterns that optimize information transfer across the extreme seasonal variations in atmospheric density and environmental acoustic filtering. Migration patterns in polar dinosaur populations involve movements between summer feeding areas and winter survival refugia that operate on geographical scales spanning entire continents. These seasonal migrations, following routes established across millions of years of polar adaptation, connect high-latitude feeding areas with lower-latitude wintering grounds through navigation systems that operate independently of solar compass mechanisms that become unreliable at extreme latitudes. The resulting migration behaviors demonstrate spatial navigation capabilities that approach those found in modern Arctic-adapted species. Reproductive timing in polar dinosaurs requires synchronization with photoperiod cycles that operate on annual rhythms completely different from temperate breeding seasons. Egg-laying schedules, incubation periods, and juvenile development rates achieve coordination with optimal feeding periods that occur during brief summer growing seasons. These reproductive adaptations, calibrated across geological ages of polar evolution, demonstrate temporal precision in biological scheduling that approaches astronomical accuracy in matching reproductive cycles to resource availability patterns. The insulation strategies developed by polar dinosaurs include feather modifications that create thermal retention capabilities exceeding those found in any temperate species. Their feather architecture, evolved specifically for heat conservation under extreme cold conditions, achieves insulation efficiency that approaches theoretical limits for biological thermal regulation systems. Some species develop feather density gradients that provide variable insulation according to seasonal temperature requirements. Their plumage modifications creating adaptive thermal regulation systems that respond to environmental temperature variations across seasonal cycles. Social systems in polar dinosaur communities involve resource-sharing behaviors and communal care strategies that increase survival probability during periods when individual resource acquisition becomes impossible. These cooperative behaviors, refined across millions of years of polar adaptation, include food storage and distribution systems that operate across extended social networks spanning multiple family groups. The resulting social organization demonstrates altruistic cooperation that exceeds anything found in temperate dinosaur populations operating under less extreme environmental constraints. The seasonal light variations experienced in polar regions create selection pressures for enhanced spatial memory and navigation capabilities that allow dinosaurs to maintain territorial knowledge across months of darkness when visual landmarks become unrecognizable. These cognitive adaptations include mental mapping systems that integrate non-visual sensory information such as magnetic field orientation, infrasound patterns, and chemical landmark recognition. The resulting navigation capabilities represent neural achievements that approach those found in modern long-distance migratory species. Predator-prey relationships in polar environments operate according to seasonal dynamics that concentrate hunting opportunities into brief periods of optimal activity. Carnivorous dinosaurs develop hunting strategies that maximize prey, capture efficiency during summer abundance periods, while maintaining survival capabilities during winter resource scarcity. These temporal hunting adaptations demonstrate behavioral flexibility that allows switching between high-activity predation and low-activity survival modes according to seasonal resource availability patterns. The geological processes that operate in polar regions, including freeze-thaw cycles in surface soils and seasonal permafrost formation, create unique preservation conditions for dinosaur fossils that provide detailed records of polar adaptation strategies. These fossil assemblages reveal evolutionary experiments in cold climate survival that continental dinosaur evolution never attempted. Their specimens demonstrating physiological and behavioral adaptations that represent solutions to environmental challenges operating at the extremes of biological survivability. In this world where polar forests hold their breath through seasons of endless light and endless darkness, the high-latitude dinosaur communities represent evolutionary laboratories where life explores survival strategies under conditions that approach the environmental extremes found on other worlds. Their adaptations to photoperiod cycles and thermal challenges that operate on astronomical timescales demonstrate the creative potential of evolution, operating under environmental constraints that test the limits of biological adaptation. Mountain ranges carve new kingdoms where alpine orogeny creates isolated populations that evolve into bizarre endemic forms across elevated landscapes that rise toward atmospheric conditions approaching those found at commercial aircraft cruising altitudes. The Himalayas, as they achieve heights exceeding modern elevations through tectonic processes operating with geological persistence, support dinosaur communities adapted for life in thin air where oxygen partial pressure approaches the limits of vertebrate respiratory capability. These high-altitude specialists develop physiological modifications that include enlarged hearts, enhanced hemoglobin oxygen affinity, and respiratory systems that achieve gas exchange efficiency under atmospheric conditions that would prove lethal to sea-level adapted organisms. The Andes, rising through collisional tectonics that operate across millions of years, create linear habitat corridors where dinosaur populations develop altitudinal adaptations that follow elevation gradients with precision that matches the mathematical relationships governing atmospheric pressure variation with altitude. Small theropods at tree-line elevations develop metabolic rates and cardiovascular systems that function efficiently in atmospheric conditions, where oxygen availability becomes the limiting factor for active behavior. Their physiological adaptations, refined across geological ages of high-altitude evolution, demonstrate biochemical engineering that approaches theoretical limits for vertebrate survival under hypoxic conditions. Some high-altitude physiologists studying this timeline would find evidence of dinosaur populations that developed enhanced oxygen extraction capabilities through modifications in blood chemistry and cellular metabolism that exceeded anything found in modern high-altitude adapted species. These physiological innovations include hemoglobin variants with oxygen binding curves optimized for low partial pressure environments, and cellular respiratory systems that achieve ATP production efficiency under hypoxic conditions that approach the biochemical limits for aerobic metabolism. The resulting physiological systems represent evolutionary solutions to environmental challenges that operate at the molecular level of biological organization. The isolation effects created by mountain barriers produce vicariant speciation patterns where dinosaur populations separated by topographic boundaries evolve independently toward endemic forms that exist nowhere outside specific mountain ranges. These isolated populations, separated by elevational barriers that persist for millions of years, develop morphological characteristics and behavioral patterns that reflect adaptation to local environmental conditions, operating at scales ranging from individual mountain valleys to entire mountain systems. The resulting biodiversity patterns create evolutionary laboratories where natural selection explores adaptive possibilities impossible under the gene flow conditions that exist in continuous habitat distributions. Behavioral adaptations for mountain living include enhanced spatial navigation capabilities that allow dinosaurs to maintain territorial knowledge across three-dimensional landscape architectures where elevation changes, create environmental gradients operating across distances measured in vertical rather than horizontal dimensions. These cognitive adaptations demonstrate mental mapping systems that integrate topographic information with seasonal resource availability patterns that vary according to elevation-dependent climate conditions. The resulting behavioral capabilities represent neural achievements that exceed those found in flat-terrain species that never face the cognitive challenges of mountainous habitat navigation. The plant communities that support mountain dinosaur populations achieve photosynthetic efficiency under atmospheric conditions, where reduced carbon dioxide, partial pressure, and enhanced ultraviolet radiation create environmental stress that approaches the limits of plant physiological tolerance. These alpine vegetation systems develop productivity cycles that concentrate biomass accumulation into brief growing seasons determined by elevation-dependent temperature patterns and snow-free periods that decrease with altitude according to mathematical relationships governing mountain climate systems. The resulting plant-herbivore relationships operate under temporal constraints that create selection pressures unknown in lowland ecosystems. Thermoregulation strategies in high-altitude dinosaurs require physiological and behavioral adaptations that address both the reduced atmospheric thermal capacity found at elevated altitudes and the enhanced radiative cooling that occurs under thin atmosphere conditions. Large herbivorous dinosaurs develop behavioral patterns that maximize solar heat gain during daylight periods, while minimizing heat loss during nighttime temperature drops that can exceed those found in polar regions despite temperate latitudes. These thermoregulatory adaptations, refined across millions of years of mountain evolution, demonstrate biological solutions to thermal challenges that operate at the intersection of physics and physiology. Reproductive strategies in mountain dinosaur populations involve timing mechanisms that synchronize breeding activities with elevation-dependent seasonal patterns that create optimal conditions for egg incubation and juvenile development within narrow temporal windows determined by mountain weather systems. These reproductive adaptations require predictive capabilities that allow anticipation of seasonal conditions across elevation gradients where temperature, precipitation, and photoperiod vary according to topographic factors that create microclimatic diversity within individual mountain valleys. The acoustic properties of mountain environments create unique advantages and challenges for dinosaur communication systems that operate across landscapes where sound transmission varies according to elevation, dependent atmospheric density, and topographic sound reflection patterns. Mountain dinosaur vocalizations achieve frequency modulations and amplitude patterns that optimize communication range across three-dimensional habitat architectures where sound propagation follows complex pathways determined by valley configurations and atmospheric stratification effects that vary with altitude. Migration patterns in mountain dinosaur populations involve altitudinal movements that track seasonal resource availability patterns across elevation gradients where optimal habitat conditions migrate vertically rather than horizontally according to seasonal temperature cycles. These altitudinal migrations, following routes established across millions of years of mountain adaptation, demonstrate navigation capabilities that operate in three-dimensional space where directional orientation must account for topographic complexity that exceeds anything found in flat terrain environments. Predator-prey relationships in mountain ecosystems operate according to dynamics that incorporate the enhanced visibility conditions and reduced cover availability that characterize high-altitude environments. Mountain predators develop hunting strategies that take advantage of the extended sight lines available across mountain landscapes, while their prey species evolve enhanced vigilance behaviours and escape strategies that utilise topographic features for predator avoidance. These ecological interactions, refined across geological ages of mountain evolution, create predator-prey arms races that operate under environmental conditions that approach the extremes of terrestrial habitat variation. The geological processes that shape mountain environments create habitat instability that requires dinosaur populations to develop adaptive flexibility for surviving periodic landscape modification through landslides, glacial activity, and tectonic adjustments that operate on timescales ranging from individual storms to geological ages. These environmental disturbances select for behavioral and physiological adaptations that allow rapid response to habitat modification events while maintaining population viability across the temporal scales required for mountain ecosystem stability. The mineral-rich water sources that emerge from mountain geological formations provide unique nutritional resources that support dinosaur bone development and metabolic processes in ways that lowland environments cannot duplicate. Mountain dinosaur populations achieve skeletal densities and physiological capabilities that reflect enhanced mineral nutrition from geological water sources enriched by extended contact with diverse rock formations that create chemical diversity unknown in lowland aquatic systems. In this world where mountain ranges carve kingdoms from atmospheric extremes and topographic isolation, the elevated dinosaur communities represent evolutionary experiments in survival under conditions that approach the environmental limits for terrestrial life. Their adaptations to thin air and three-dimensional landscapes demonstrate the creative potential of natural selection operating under physical constraints that test the boundaries of biological possibility. Rivers carry ancient sediments where fluvial systems transport dinosaur remains across vast distances, creating fossil assemblages that span geological eras in stratified deposits that record the patient accumulation of biological history across timescales that dwarf human comprehension. The Mississippi drainage system, as it carves its channel through landscapes that never knew glacial scouring, preserves dinosaur communities in alluvial deposits that extend from the Rocky Mountain headwaters to deltaic environments where terrestrial fossils mix with marine specimens in sedimentary matrices that chronicle millions of years of uninterrupted evolutionary continuity. The hydrological processes that govern sediment transport in these river systems operate according to mathematical relationships that determine the size sorting and spatial distribution of fossil remains with precision that approaches engineering specification. Large dinosaur bones, transported during flood events that occur on decadal timescales, accumulate in channel deposits where hydraulic conditions create concentration mechanisms that preserve complete skeletal assemblages in anatomical association. Smaller bones and teeth, carried farther by currents that operate according to fluid dynamic principles, create dispersal patterns that document dinosaur community composition across drainage basin scales spanning entire continents. Some taphonomists studying this timeline would find evidence of exceptional preservation conditions in river systems, where rapid burial rates and optimal geochemical conditions create fossilization environments that preserve soft tissue details and biomolecular signatures impossible to maintain under typical burial conditions. These preservation environments, maintained by fluvial processes operating across geological ages, create fossil records that document dinosaur physiology, behaviour, and ecological relationships with resolution that approaches that found in modern biological specimens. The resulting paleontological archives represent evolutionary documentation that exceeds anything available in our timeline's more fragmentary fossil record. The seasonal flood cycles that characterise these ancient river systems create predictable patterns of sediment deposition and erosion that influence dinosaur behaviour and habitat utilisation across temporal scales, ranging from individual seasons to geological ages. Dinosaur populations develop behavioural patterns that anticipate flood timing and intensity, their seasonal migrations and breeding cycles achieving synchronisation with hydrological patterns that operate on astronomical timescales. These behavioral adaptations demonstrate environmental prediction capabilities that approach those found in modern species adapted to seasonally variable aquatic environments. Riparian vegetation along these ancient waterways develops community structures that balance flood tolerance with the need to provide habitat for dinosaur populations that utilize river corridors for seasonal migration and permanent residence. These riverside plant communities achieved species diversity and productivity levels that exceed those found in upland habitats. Their enhanced growth rates supported by nutrient inputs from seasonal flooding that transports mineral-rich sediments from geological formations spanning entire mountain ranges. The resulting riparian ecosystems create habitat conditions that support dinosaur diversity patterns impossible under the resource constraints of non-fluvial environments. The chemical composition of ancient river water, enriched by extended contact with diverse geological formations, creates aquatic chemistry that supports unique communities of freshwater organisms that exist nowhere outside riverine environments. These aquatic ecosystems develop productivity cycles that influence terrestrial dinosaur populations through complex food web relationships that connect aquatic primary production to terrestrial herbivore communities via amphibious plant species and seasonal flooding patterns. The resulting ecological interactions demonstrate energy transfer mechanisms that operate across the boundaries between aquatic and terrestrial systems. Paleocurrent analysis of sedimentary structures preserved in ancient river deposits reveals flow patterns and channel configurations that document changes in drainage system architecture across geological timescales. These hydrological reconstructions provide evidence of river system evolution that operated independently of the glacial modifications that shape drainage patterns in our timeline. Their channel patterns reflecting tectonic controls and climatic variations that created fluvial landscapes unknown in post-glacial river systems. The resulting drainage architectures supported dinosaur migration routes and habitat connectivity patterns that exceeded anything possible under glacially modified topography. The isotopic signatures preserved in river-transported dinosaur fossils provide chemical documentation of dietary relationships, migration patterns, and physiological processes that operated across the geographical scales encompassed by continental drainage systems. These geochemical traces reveal information about dinosaur ecology that extends beyond individual specimens to document population-level processes and community interactions across temporal scales spanning multiple generations. The resulting isotopic archives represent biological databases that preserve ecological information with chemical precision that approaches laboratory analytical standards. Trace fossil preservation in river channel deposits documents dinosaur behavioral patterns that include seasonal congregation sites, territorial marking systems, and social interaction patterns that operated along river corridors used for migration and resource access. These ichnological assemblages preserve evidence of dinosaur social behaviours that extended beyond individual interactions to include community-level organisation patterns that operated across geographical scales determined by river system architecture. The resulting behavioural fossil record demonstrates social complexity that exceeded anything documented in terrestrial trace fossil assemblages. The meander patterns developed by ancient river systems create oxbow lakes and abandoned channel segments that serve as evolutionary laboratories where isolated aquatic communities develop endemic characteristics within timeframes measured in thousands rather than millions of years. These fluvial habitat islands support rapid speciation events in both aquatic and semi-aquatic dinosaur populations. The isolation effects creating biodiversity patterns that continental evolution never achieves. The resulting endemic communities represent evolutionary experiments in rapid adaptation that demonstrate the creative potential of geographical isolation operating on ecological timescales. Groundwater interactions with surface water systems create spring-fed habitats that provide thermal, refugia, and mineral-rich water sources that support dinosaur populations during periods of environmental stress. These groundwater-dependent ecosystems maintain habitat stability that allows species survival during climatic variations that eliminate surface water resources across regional scales. The chemical signatures of groundwater-influenced habitats create unique physiological opportunities for dinosaur populations that develop specialized mineral utilization capabilities impossible under surface water nutrition regimes. The deltaic environments where ancient rivers enter marine systems create transitional habitats that support both terrestrial and aquatic dinosaur communities in ecological relationships that blur the boundaries between land and sea. These river-mouth ecosystems achieve productivity levels that approach those found in marine upwelling zones. Their enhanced biological activity supporting dinosaur diversity patterns that exceed those found in purely terrestrial or purely marine environments. The resulting ecological interfaces demonstrate evolutionary opportunities that arise at the boundaries between different environmental systems. Seasonal debris flows and flash flood events in ancient river systems create catastrophic burial conditions that preserve complete dinosaur communities in geological instantaneity that approaches photographic documentation of ancient ecosystems. These event deposits provide snapshots of dinosaur community composition and ecological relationships that reveal population dynamics and behavioral patterns operating at temporal resolutions that approach those found in modern ecological studies. In this world where rivers carry the ancient sediments of uninterrupted evolutionary history, the fluvial systems represent archives that preserve biological information across geological timescales, with preservation quality that approaches laboratory documentation standards. Their fossil assemblages chronicle evolutionary continuity that catastrophic extinction would have interrupted, creating paleontological records that document the full creative potential of evolution operating without temporal constraints. Atmospheric rivers dance across continental landscapes where weather patterns stabilize around dinosaur-influenced vegetation, creating predictable monsoons that shape continental evolution through hydrological cycles calibrated by millions of years of plant-herbivore coevolution. The massive transpiration rates generated by dinosaur-maintained forest systems create atmospheric moisture loading that exceeds anything found in our timeline's more recently evolved vegetation communities. Their water vapor contributions driving precipitation patterns that operate with seasonal regularity approaching astronomical precision. These biological weather systems, powered by the metabolic output of creatures whose daily water consumption exceeds that of small cities, create climate stability that allows evolutionary processes to proceed without the disruption that chaotic weather patterns would impose. The monsoon systems that develop around sauropod browsing areas operate according to feedback mechanisms that connect herbivore behavior with atmospheric circulation patterns across geographical scales spanning continents. When massive herds concentrate in seasonal feeding areas, their combined respiration and the enhanced plant transpiration that responds to their browsing pressure create convective systems that generate precipitation with timing and intensity that herbivorous dinosaurs learn to anticipate across seasonal cycles. These biologically driven weather patterns represent ecosystem scale engineering that approaches the complexity of modern technological climate modification systems. Some atmospheric scientists studying this timeline would find evidence of stable pressure systems maintained by the thermal effects of extensive dinosaur-modified landscapes, their surface heating and cooling patterns creating atmospheric circulation cells that persist across seasonal cycles with stability unknown in our timeline's more variable climate systems. These biological climate modifications include enhanced surface roughness from dinosaur trampling that affects boundary layer turbulence, and modified albedo patterns from selective browsing that influences solar radiation absorption across landscape scales. The resulting atmospheric dynamics demonstrate biological influences on weather systems that operate at the intersection of ecology and meteorology. The seasonal timing of these dinosaur-influenced monsoons creates agricultural-scale productivity cycles in plant communities that achieve biomass accumulation rates approaching those found in modern intensive farming systems. Wild vegetation, stimulated by predictable moisture delivery and optimal soil conditions maintained by dinosaur activity, develops growth patterns that concentrate photosynthetic activity into periods when atmospheric and soil conditions achieve optimal coordination. These natural agricultural systems, refined across millions of years of plant-herbivore climate cooperation, demonstrate biological productivity that exceeds anything achieved through human agricultural technology. Water vapor transport patterns in these stable atmospheric systems create humidity, gradients that extend the effective range of moisture-dependent plant communities far beyond their normal geographical limits. Desert margins, influenced by dinosaur-generated atmospheric moisture transport, support vegetation communities that exist hundreds of miles beyond their normal precipitation requirements. These extended habitat ranges allow plant and dinosaur communities to achieve geographical distributions that approach theoretical optimums for species dispersal and genetic diversity maintenance across continental scales. The predictability of these biologically influenced weather systems allows dinosaur populations to develop behavioral calendars that synchronize reproduction, migration, and resource utilization with precipitation patterns that operate on multi-annual cycles determined by astronomical forcing of biological atmospheric modification. These long-term behavioral adaptations demonstrate environmental prediction capabilities that incorporate both biological and atmospheric variables in decision-making processes that optimize survival strategies across temporal scales spanning multiple individual lifespans. Cloud formation processes in dinosaur-influenced atmospheric systems achieve water droplet nucleation efficiency that approaches theoretical optimums for precipitation generation. Their enhanced atmospheric particle loading from biological sources, creating condensation conditions that maximize rainfall production from available atmospheric moisture. The resulting precipitation efficiency creates water delivery systems that approach the performance characteristics of modern cloud seeding technology. Their biological cloud modification achieving moisture extraction rates that exceed those found in unmodified atmospheric systems. Regional climate stability maintained by these biological weather systems creates growing season predictability that allows plant communities to develop specialized phenological timing that matches optimal growth periods with resource availability patterns operating on astronomical timescales. The resulting seasonal coordination between plant productivity and dinosaur resource requirements achieves efficiency levels that approach those found in agricultural systems designed through technological optimization rather than evolutionary adaptation. Temperature moderation effects from dinosaur-influenced atmospheric circulation create thermal stability that reduces seasonal and diurnal temperature variations across continental interiors that would otherwise experience extreme temperature fluctuations. These biological climate buffering effects operate through enhanced atmospheric moisture content and modified wind patterns that transport thermal energy with efficiency approaching that of technological climate control systems. The resulting thermal stability creates habitat conditions that support species diversity patterns impossible under more variable temperature regimes. Precipitation chemistry in these dinosaur-influenced weather systems carries nutrient concentrations that reflect the biological processes contributing to atmospheric moisture loading. Their enhanced nitrogen and mineral content creating natural fertilization effects that exceed those found in purely geological precipitation systems. This biologically enriched rainfall creates soil chemistry that supports plant productivity levels approaching those found in artificially fertilized agricultural systems. Their enhanced nutrient cycling demonstrating biological optimization that operates at ecosystem scales. The long-term stability of these atmospheric river systems creates hydrological predictability that allows dinosaur populations to establish permanent settlements in areas that would be uninhabitable under more variable precipitation regimes. These climatically stable regions support population densities and social complexity levels that approach those found in modern agricultural societies. Their resource predictability allowing the development of complex social systems that require environmental reliability for long-term viability. Storm system modification by dinosaur-influenced atmospheric conditions creates weather patterns that minimize the destructive potential of severe weather events while maintaining the precipitation delivery necessary for ecosystem productivity. The biological modification of atmospheric instability patterns reduces the frequency and intensity of damaging storms while preserving the moisture transport mechanisms that maintain continental-scale water balance. These natural weather modification effects demonstrate biological climate engineering that approaches the sophistication of technological weather control systems. The seasonal reversal patterns that characterize these dinosaur-influenced monsoon systems create atmospheric circulation rhythms that operate with precision approaching that of mechanical systems. Their biological timing mechanisms achieving synchronization with astronomical cycles that create predictable weather patterns across geological timescales. These biological atmospheric clocks demonstrate environmental coordination capabilities that approach those found in technologically designed climate control systems. Atmospheric chemistry in these dinosaur-influenced weather systems maintains gas concentrations and humidity levels that optimize both plant photosynthetic efficiency and dinosaur respiratory function, creating atmospheric conditions that approach ideal specifications for biological activity. The resulting atmospheric composition represents biological atmospheric engineering that achieves life support conditions approaching those found in controlled environment systems designed through technological optimization. In this world where atmospheric rivers dance to biological choreography refined across geological ages, the weather patterns represent ecosystem-scale engineering projects that demonstrate the creative potential of biological systems operating without the constraints that catastrophic environmental change would impose. These dinosaur-influenced climate systems achieve stability and productivity that approach technological standards for environmental optimization. Deep time counts its heartbeats in the patient accumulation of sedimentary layers where millions of years stack like pages in a geological manuscript, written in the language of gradual change rather than catastrophic punctuation. Each stratum preserves evidence of dinosaur communities that existed across temporal scales so vast that individual species persist for periods that exceed the entire duration of mammalian dominance in our timeline, their evolutionary stability demonstrating the creative potential of biological systems operating without the disruption that mass extinction events impose on adaptive processes. The limestone beds that form in shallow seas record shell chemistry that documents atmospheric carbon dioxide concentrations, maintained at levels supporting reptilian gigantism across geological eras. The mathematical precision with which evolutionary change accumulates across these extended timescales approaches the regularity found in physical processes governed by fundamental constants. Each increment of biological modification building upon previous adaptations with consistency that creates evolutionary trajectories spanning tens of millions of years without interruption. Dinosaur lineages develop morphological complexity through the patient addition of structural modifications that individually represent minor variations but collectively achieve anatomical sophistication approaching theoretical optimums for biological engineering solutions to environmental challenges operating across continental scales. Some geochronologists studying this timeline would find isotopic evidence of biological processes that operated with such temporal consistency that their chemical signatures create dating standards approaching the precision of radiometric decay curves. The biological modification of atmospheric and oceanic chemistry providing chronological markers that document evolutionary processes with temporal resolution exceeding that available through purely geological dating methods. These biological chronometers demonstrate life processes operating with regularity that approaches the consistency of physical constants governing radioactive decay systems. The fossilization processes that preserve dinosaur remains across these extended timescales achieve preservation quality that approaches that found in modern specimen preparation techniques. Their exceptional preservation conditions maintained by stable environmental chemistry that operates without the disruption that rapid climate change would impose on taphonomic processes. Complete skeletal articulation, soft tissue preservation, and even cellular structure documentation occur with frequency that creates paleontological databases approaching the comprehensiveness of modern biological surveys conducted on living populations. Evolutionary experimentation across these vast temporal scales explores adaptive possibilities that shorter evolutionary timescales never allow. Dinosaur lineages developing specialized anatomical features and behavioral capabilities that require millions of years of continuous selective pressure to achieve functional optimization. The resulting biological diversity includes morphological innovations and ecological relationships that approach theoretical limits for biological complexity. Their specialized adaptations representing evolutionary achievements impossible under the temporal constraints that catastrophic extinction imposes on adaptive processes. The sedimentary basins that accumulate dinosaur fossils across these geological ages create stratigraphic sequences that document evolutionary processes with temporal resolution approaching annual precision. Their fine-scale layering preserving evidence of seasonal cycles and behavioural patterns that operated across individual lifespans within the context of evolutionary changes spanning millions of years. These geological archives demonstrate the relationship between ecological processes operating on seasonal timescales and evolutionary processes operating on geological timescales, with documentation quality that exceeds anything available in our timeline's more fragmentary fossil record. Biogeochemical cycles in these temporally extended ecosystems achieve efficiency levels that approach theoretical optimums for nutrient cycling and energy transfer. Their stability maintained by biological feedback mechanisms refined across geological ages of ecosystem development. Carbon cycling, nitrogen fixation, and mineral processing operate with mathematical precision that creates ecosystem productivity levels approaching those found in technologically optimized biological systems. Their efficiency demonstrating the optimization potential of biological processes given unlimited evolutionary time. The phylogenetic relationships that develop across these extended evolutionary timescales create taxonomic diversity patterns that approach theoretical maximums for biological classification systems. Dinosaur lineages exploring morphological and ecological possibilities with comprehensiveness that approaches exhaustive sampling of adaptive landscapes. Species diversity, genus-level differentiation, and family-level radiation achieve organizational complexity that exceeds anything documented in our timeline's more temporally constrained evolutionary record. Their taxonomic relationships demonstrating evolutionary creativity operating without temporal limitations. Population dynamics across these vast timescales achieve stability patterns that approach those found in mathematical models of optimal population regulation. Dinosaur communities developing demographic relationships that maintain species diversity and ecosystem function across environmental variations operating on astronomical cycles. These population regulation mechanisms demonstrate biological system stability that approaches the consistency found in physical systems governed by conservation laws. Their demographic processes operating with precision that maintains ecosystem function across geological ages. The ecological networks that develop across these extended timescales achieve interaction complexity that approaches that found in modern technological networks designed through systematic optimization. Their food web relationships and mutualistic partnerships demonstrating organizational sophistication that exceeds anything documented in our timeline's more recently evolved ecosystems. Predator-prey relationships, competitive interactions, and cooperative behaviors achieve mathematical precision that approaches optimal solutions to ecological resource distribution problems operating across landscape scales. Behavioral evolution across these vast temporal scales produces dinosaur social systems and cognitive capabilities that approach those found in technologically advanced societies. Their cultural transmission mechanisms and learning systems demonstrating information processing capabilities that exceed anything found in our timeline's more temporally constrained evolutionary record. These behavioral achievements represent cognitive evolution operating without the interruption that catastrophic extinction imposes on cultural development processes. The climate stability maintained across these extended timescales creates environmental conditions that approach optimal specifications for biological activity. Atmospheric composition and temperature regimes achieving consistency that allows biological systems to optimize their environmental relationships across geological ages. This climatic stability demonstrates planetary system regulation that approaches the precision found in technologically controlled environments designed for optimal biological productivity. Coevolutionary relationships across these vast timescales achieve coordination precision that approaches that found in technological systems designed through engineering optimization. Plant-herbivore partnerships and predator-prey arms races developing adaptive solutions that represent optimal responses to biological challenges operating across ecosystem scales. These coevolutionary achievements demonstrate biological optimization operating without the constraints that catastrophic environmental change imposes on adaptive processes. The information content preserved in geological strata across these extended timescales approaches that found in comprehensive biological databases created through modern scientific documentation techniques. Their fossil assemblages preserving evidence of evolutionary processes with detail and temporal coverage that exceeds anything available through shorter duration studies. These geological information systems demonstrate paleontological documentation that approaches the comprehensiveness of modern biological monitoring systems. In this world where deep time counts its heartbeats across millions of uninterrupted years, the patient accumulation of evolutionary change demonstrates the creative potential of biological systems operating without temporal constraints. The sedimentary layers that preserve this evolutionary continuity represent archives of biological achievement that approach theoretical limits for evolutionary creativity and ecological optimization. Asteroid scars heal in silence where other cosmic impacts leave temporary wounds in the biosphere that dinosaur resilience ensures rapid recovery from. Their biological systems demonstrating adaptive flexibility that transforms geological catastrophes into evolutionary opportunities rather than extinction events. The Manicouagan crater, carved by an impactor that struck during the late Triassic, becomes a geological laboratory where dinosaur populations colonize the unique habitat conditions created by impact-modified landscapes. These impact sites, with their shocked minerals and ring structure topography, support endemic dinosaur communities that develop specialized adaptations for life in environments that exist nowhere outside impact crater ecosystems. The healing processes that operate in these impact-modified landscapes achieve restoration rates that approach biological optimization for ecosystem recovery. Dinosaur communities recolonizing disturbed areas with efficiency that demonstrates resilience mechanisms refined across millions of years of experience with smaller-scale environmental disruptions. Vegetation succession patterns in impact craters follow trajectories that incorporate dinosaur habitat requirements. Their plant community development achieving coordination with herbivore recolonization that approaches the precision found in planned ecosystem restoration projects. Some impact geologists studying this timeline would find evidence of biological processes that accelerate the weathering and soil formation in impact crater environments. Dinosaur activity contributing to landscape recovery through trampling, waste deposition, and vegetation management that enhances the natural processes of crater ecosystem development. These biological contributions to geological recovery demonstrate ecosystem engineering that operates at the intersection of biology and geology, their combined effects achieving restoration rates that exceed those found in purely geological recovery processes. The unique mineral compositions created by impact shock processes provide nutritional resources that support dinosaur populations with enhanced bone development and metabolic capabilities. Their access to rare earth elements and shocked mineral phases creating physiological opportunities impossible under normal geological conditions. These mineral supplementation effects, accumulated across lifespans spent in impact crater environments, create population characteristics that distinguish crater-dwelling dinosaurs from their non-crater relatives. Their enhanced mineral nutrition demonstrating the beneficial aspects of geological catastrophe. Crater lake ecosystems that develop in the central depressions of large impact structures create aquatic habitats that support both terrestrial and semi-aquatic dinosaur populations in ecological relationships that blend freshwater and impact-modified environmental conditions. These crater lakes, with their unique water chemistry derived from impact-shocked rock formations, support biological productivity levels that exceed those found in normal freshwater systems. The resulting aquatic ecosystems demonstrate the creative potential of geological catastrophe to generate novel environmental conditions that support evolutionary innovation. The hydrogeological systems that develop in impact crater environments create groundwater flow patterns that support unique vegetation communities adapted to the mineral-rich water sources that emerge from impact-fractured bedrock. These groundwater-dependent ecosystems provide habitat stability that allows species survival during regional environmental variations. Their chemical signatures creating physiological opportunities for dinosaur populations that develop specialized mineral utilization capabilities impossible under normal hydrogeological regimes. Recovery timescales in these impact-affected regions demonstrate biological resilience that achieves ecosystem restoration within periods, measured in thousands rather than millions of years. Dinosaur populations re-establishing functional communities with efficiency that approaches optimal biological colonization rates for disturbed environments. These rapid recovery processes reveal biological adaptation capabilities that transform catastrophic disturbance into evolutionary opportunity. Their restoration success demonstrating life's capacity for persistence under conditions that would eliminate less resilient biological systems. The Shattercone formations and other impact-related geological structures create microhabitat diversity that supports dinosaur communities with species compositions that exist nowhere outside impact crater environments. These geological features, created by shockwave propagation during impact events, provide habitat heterogeneity that supports evolutionary radiation in dinosaur populations that colonize crater environments. The resulting biodiversity patterns demonstrate the creative potential of geological catastrophe to generate environmental conditions that support biological innovation. Magnetic anomalies associated with impact crater formations create navigation challenges that select for enhanced spatial orientation capabilities in dinosaur populations that inhabit impact-modified landscapes. These magnetic field disturbances require behavioral adaptations that allow navigation through environments where normal magnetic compass mechanisms become unreliable. Their survival dependent on alternative navigation systems that demonstrate cognitive flexibility in response to geophysically altered environments. The thermal effects associated with impact crater formation create long-term heating patterns that modify regional climate conditions for periods extending across geological ages. These geothermal influences provide thermal resources that support dinosaur populations during periods of regional cooling. Their access to impact-generated heat sources creating survival advantages that demonstrate the beneficial aspects of geological catastrophe for biological systems adapted to exploit unusual thermal resources. Impact breccia formations create unique substrate conditions that support plant communities adapted to the mixed mineral compositions and enhanced drainage characteristics of impact-derived soils. These botanical communities, developed specifically for growth on impact-modified geological substrates, provide nutritional resources for herbivorous dinosaurs that develop digestive capabilities optimized for vegetation grown under these unusual soil chemistry conditions. The seismic effects associated with large impact events create temporary disruption of regional geological stability that selects for dinosaur behavioral adaptations capable of responding to ground motion events and structural instability. These behavioral modifications demonstrate adaptive flexibility that allow survival during periods of geological instability while maintaining the social and ecological relationships necessary for population viability across the temporal scales required for ecosystem recovery. Ring structure topography in large impact craters creates drainage patterns and elevation gradients that support habitat diversity across spatial scales, ranging from individual crater sectors to entire crater rim systems. These topographic features provide environmental heterogeneity that supports evolutionary radiation in dinosaur populations that colonize crater environments. Their habitat diversity creating opportunities for ecological specialization that approach those found in island biogeography systems. The long-term stability of impact crater environments creates habitat consistency that allows dinosaur populations to develop specialized adaptations for life in impact-modified ecosystems without the disruption that additional catastrophic events would impose on adaptive processes. These stable crater ecosystems demonstrate the transformation of geological catastrophe into evolutionary opportunity, their biological success revealing life's capacity for persistence and adaptation under conditions created by cosmic violence. Atmospheric disturbances associated with impact events create temporary climate modifications that test but do not overwhelm dinosaur physiological capabilities. their survival during impact-induced climate variations, demonstrating biological resilience that approaches optimal adaptation for catastrophic environmental change. These atmospheric recovery processes reveal dinosaur populations with adaptive flexibility sufficient to survive cosmic impacts that fall below the threshold for global extinction events. In this world where asteroid scars heal through biological persistence rather than mass extinction, the impact crater environments represent geological laboratories where life demonstrates its capacity for recovery and adaptation under conditions created by cosmic catastrophe. These crater ecosystems achieve restoration success that approaches optimal biological recovery rates. Their healing processes demonstrating the crater potential of resilience operating without terminal interruption. Magnetic poles wander aimlessly through patterns that affect navigation in migratory species. Their gradual drift across geological timescales, creating selection pressures that drive the evolution of sophisticated orientation systems in dinosaur populations, whose seasonal movements span continental distances. The Earth's magnetic field, as it reverses polarity and shifts declination according to geodynamo processes operating in the planet's molten core, creates navigational challenges that test the limits of biological compass systems refined across millions of years of magnetic adaptation. These geomagnetic variations, occurring on timescales that match evolutionary response capabilities, produce dinosaur populations with multiple redundant navigation systems that achieve spatial orientation accuracy approaching that of technological guidance systems. The paleomagnetic reversals that punctuate geological history create temporary periods of navigational chaos during which dinosaur populations must rely on alternative orientation cues, including celestial navigation, landmark recognition, and infrasonic signal detection. These geomagnetic transition periods, lasting for thousands of years during polarity reversals, select for cognitive flexibility and behavioral adaptability that allow maintenance of migration routes and territorial boundaries despite the temporary failure of magnetic compass mechanisms. The resulting navigational systems demonstrate biological redundancy that approaches the reliability standards found in technological guidance systems designed for critical navigation applications. Some paleomagnetists studying this timeline would find evidence of dinosaur behavioral modifications that correlate with magnetic field intensity variations. Their migration timing and route selection showing adaptations to the changing reliability of magnetic compass information across geological timescales. These behavioral adaptations include enhanced reliance on non-magnetic orientation cues during periods of weak magnetic field intensity, and modified migration routes that avoid regions where local magnetic anomalies interfere with compass navigation. The resulting behavioral flexibility demonstrates cognitive capabilities that approach those found in technological navigation systems that incorporate multiple redundant guidance mechanisms. The magnetic mineral compositions in dinosaur tissues, including magnetite crystals in their inner ear structures and nervous systems, achieve sensitivity levels that approach theoretical limits for biological magnetic field detection. These biomagnetic sensors, refined across millions of years of selection for navigational accuracy, demonstrate cellular architecture that rivals the precision found in technological magnetometers designed for scientific measurement applications. Their magnetic sensitivity allows detection of field strength variations and directional changes that approach the resolution capabilities of laboratory magnetic field measurement instruments. Navigation systems in long-distance migratory dinosaurs achieve integration of magnetic compass information with celestial navigation, landmark recognition, and atmospheric infrasound detection that creates spatial orientation capabilities exceeding those found in any single guidance system. These multimodal navigation mechanisms demonstrate information processing capabilities that approach those found in modern GPS systems. Their biological computation achieving positional accuracy that allows successful completion of migration routes spanning thousands of miles across landscapes where individual navigation errors could prove fatal. The geological processes that drive magnetic pole wandering create predictable patterns of field declination change that operate on timescales, allowing dinosaur populations to track optimal orientation angles across their evolutionary development. These magnetic field evolution patterns documented in paleomagnetic records preserved in sedimentary formations, reveal dinosaur adaptation to gradually changing magnetic conditions that required continuous recalibration of biological compass systems across geological ages. The resulting magnetic adaptations demonstrate evolutionary tracking of geophysical changes that approaches real-time optimization of biological systems to environmental variation. Regional magnetic anomalies created by geological features including iron ore deposits, volcanic formations, and impact crater structures create local navigation challenges that select for enhanced cognitive mapping capabilities in dinosaur populations inhabiting magnetically complex landscapes. These populations develop spatial memory systems that incorporate magnetic anomaly patterns into their territorial knowledge. Their cognitive maps achieving integration of magnetic field information with topographic and ecological landmarks that approach the sophistication found in technological geographic information systems. The correlation between magnetic field variations and dinosaur population genetics reveals evidence of magnetic navigation influencing mate selection and genetic exchange patterns across continental distances. Populations that maintain magnetic navigation accuracy achieve higher rates of successful long-distance dispersal and genetic connectivity, while populations with reduced magnetic sensitivity show increased geographical isolation and genetic differentiation. These population genetic effects demonstrate the evolutionary importance of magnetic navigation systems for maintaining species-level genetic diversity across landscape scales. Magnetic storm effects associated with solar activity create temporary disruption of biological compass systems that require behavioral adaptations for maintaining navigation accuracy during periods of enhanced geomagnetic disturbance. Dinosaur populations develop behavioral patterns that recognize the environmental cues associated with approaching magnetic storms. Their activity modifications demonstrating predictive capabilities that allow anticipation of navigation system disruption before it occurs. These behavioral adaptations reveal biological monitoring of space weather effects that approaches the sophistication found in technological systems designed for magnetic storm prediction. The interaction between magnetic navigation and other sensory systems in dinosaur brains achieves neural integration that approaches optimal information processing for spatial orientation under variable environmental conditions. These neural networks, refined across millions of years of navigational selection pressure, demonstrate computational architectures that rival those found in technological navigation systems designed through engineering optimization. Their biological computation achieves real-time integration of multiple navigation inputs with processing speed that approaches technological signal processing capabilities. Seasonal variations in magnetic field parameters create annual patterns of navigation accuracy that influence dinosaur reproductive timing, territorial behavior, and resource utilization strategies across continental scales. These behavioral responses to magnetic seasonality demonstrate biological calendar systems that incorporate geophysical information with astronomical and climatic timing cues. Their temporal coordination achieving precision that approaches that found in technological chronometer systems designed for optimal timing applications. The preservation of magnetic information in dinosaur fossil assemblages provides evidence of magnetic navigation capabilities that operated across geological timescales. Their bone chemistry and crystalline structures preserving evidence of biological magnetic field detection that exceeds the sensitivity found in most technological magnetic sensors. These paleomagnetic signatures demonstrate magnetic navigation systems that achieved functionality across environmental conditions and temporal scales that exceed anything documented in our timeline's more recently evolved magnetic navigation systems. Long-term evolutionary trends in dinosaur magnetic navigation systems reveal progressive optimization of biological compass mechanisms that approach theoretical limits for magnetic field detection and directional accuracy. These evolutionary improvements, documented across millions of years of paleomagnetic and paleontological evidence, demonstrate biological magnetic navigation development that approaches optimal engineering solutions for spatial orientation under variable magnetic field conditions. The global coordination of dinosaur migration patterns across continents separated by oceanic distances reveals magnetic navigation systems that achieve intercontinental accuracy despite magnetic field variations and geographical obstacles that would challenge even modern technological navigation systems. These coordinated migration patterns demonstrate biological navigation capabilities that approach those found in satellite-guided navigation systems designed for global positioning applications. In this world where magnetic poles wander through patterns that test the limits of biological navigation, the dinosaur populations that learned to track Earth's shifting magnetic field represent evolutionary achievements in spatial orientation that approach the sophistication of technological guidance systems. Their biological compass mechanisms demonstrate adaptive solutions to navigational challenges that operate at the intersection of biology and geophysics. Shallow seas breathe slowly in the patient rhythm of epicontinental waters that support diverse aquatic dinosaur communities. Their gentle waves lapping at shores that have known no glacial sea level fluctuations for geological ages stretching back to when these inland oceans first filled the low-lying centres of stable continental cratons. The Western Interior Seaway, as it maintains its presence across the heart of what will never be called North America, creates marine habitat conditions that persist with stability unknown in our timeline's more tectonically and climatically active ocean systems. These vast, shallow waters, warmed by greenhouse atmosphere and protected from oceanic storms by surrounding land masses, provide evolutionary laboratories where marine reptiles explore adaptive possibilities that deeper oceanic environments never offer. The tidal systems that operate in these epicontinental seas achieve mathematical precision in their daily and monthly cycles, their shallow water dynamics creating predictable patterns of water movement and resource concentration that marine dinosaur populations learn to exploit with efficiency approaching optimal biological utilization of tidal energy resources. Mosasaurs and plesiosaurs develop feeding strategies that synchronize their hunting activities with tidal cycles that concentrate prey organisms in predictable spatial and temporal patterns. These tidal adaptations demonstrate biological timing systems that achieve coordination with astronomical rhythms operating on scales ranging from individual tides to seasonal tide intensity variations. Some marine paleontologists studying this timeline would find evidence of unique evolutionary pathways in dinosaur lineages that adapted specifically for life in shallow marine environments. Their morphological modifications reflecting optimization for hunting and locomotion in water depths that never exceed a few hundred feet. These shallow water specialists develop body proportions and swimming techniques that achieve maximum efficiency in environments where surface proximity affects both prey availability and predation strategies. The resulting anatomical adaptations represent evolutionary solutions to environmental challenges that exist nowhere in deep oceanic habitats. The chemical composition of these epicontinental waters reflects extended contact with continental rock formations and dinosaur-influenced terrestrial ecosystems. Their dissolved mineral content and organic compounds creating aquatic chemistry that supports biological productivity levels approaching those found in modern coastal upwelling zones. Enhanced nutrient cycling between terrestrial and marine systems creates biological productivity that exceeds oceanic productivity levels. The shallow water depths allowing more efficient light penetration and photosynthetic activity that supports complex food webs extending from microscopic plankton to massive marine reptile apex predators. Seasonal productivity cycles in these shallow seas follow patterns that coordinate marine primary production with terrestrial nutrient inputs delivered by river systems draining dinosaur-inhabited landscapes. These productivity pulses, predictable across seasonal and annual cycles, create resource abundance patterns that support marine dinosaur reproductive strategies and migration behaviours calibrated to optimal feeding conditions. The resulting biological rhythms demonstrate ecosystem-scale coordination that approaches the precision found in agricultural systems designed for optimal resource utilization timing. The thermal properties of shallow epicontinental waters create temperature regimes that remain optimal for reptilian marine life across seasonal cycles. Their reduced thermal inertia compared to deep oceans, allowing rapid warming during spring and summer seasons, while maintaining sufficient thermal mass to prevent winter cooling below reptilian, physiological tolerance limits. These thermal characteristics support year-round marine reptile activity levels that exceed anything possible in deeper, more thermally stable oceanic environments where seasonal temperature variations would require different physiological adaptations. Wave action patterns in these protected inland seas create gentler hydrodynamic conditions that support marine reptile behaviours and morphological features adapted specifically for moderate water movement rather than the extreme wave conditions found in oceanic environments. The resulting evolutionary adaptations include enhanced maneuverability for hunting in restricted spaces and social behaviours that operate effectively under calmer water conditions that allow acoustic communication and visual coordination across greater distances than oceanic wave action would permit. Benthic communities in these shallow seas develop exceptional diversity and abundance levels that support marine reptile feeding strategies impossible in deeper marine environments where seafloor productivity remains limited by light availability and pressure constraints. These shallow water benthos communities achieve species diversity and biomass levels that approach those found in tropical reef systems. Their enhanced productivity supporting marine reptile populations with feeding specializations that range from benthic grazing to specialized predation on specific invertebrate communities. The sedimentary processes operating in these epicontinental seas create fossil preservation conditions that exceed those found in deeper marine environments. Their gentle water circulation and optimal burial rates, producing fossil assemblages that document marine dinosaur evolution with temporal resolution and specimen quality approaching that found in modern biological surveys. These paleontological archives preserve evidence of marine reptile behavioral patterns, ecological relationships, and evolutionary trends with documentation quality that exceeds anything available from oceanic fossil deposits. Freshwater influence from continental river systems creates salinity gradients and chemical stratification patterns in these epicontinental seas that support both marine and brackish water dinosaur populations in the same geographical regions. These salinity transition zones provide habitat diversity that allows evolutionary radiation in marine reptile populations that develop tolerance ranges spanning the full spectrum from freshwater to marine salinity conditions. The resulting physiological adaptations demonstrate biological flexibility that approaches that found in anadromous species that migrate between freshwater and marine environments. The interconnection between different epicontinental sea basins creates marine highways that support long-distance migration patterns in marine dinosaur populations. Their seasonal movements following water temperature gradients and productivity cycles that span continental distances. These migration routes, established across millions of years of marine adaptation, demonstrate navigation capabilities that allow precision movement across shallow water systems where traditional oceanic navigation cues become unreliable or absent. Atmospheric oceanic interactions in these shallow marine systems create local weather patterns and atmospheric circulation effects that influence both marine and adjacent terrestrial dinosaur communities. The enhanced evaporation from extensive shallow water surfaces contributes to atmospheric moisture loading that affects regional precipitation patterns, creating atmospheric oceanic terrestrial linkages that operate as integrated biological systems spanning multiple environmental domains. Seasonal ice formation, where it occurs at all in these warm, shallow seas, creates temporary habitat modifications that provide unique ecological opportunities for marine reptile populations adapted to exploit the enhanced prey concentration and modified hunting conditions that ice edge environments provide. These seasonal ice adaptations, developed in the rare cases where shallow water cooling approaches freezing temperatures, represent specialized evolutionary responses to environmental conditions that exist nowhere in deeper marine systems. The acoustic properties of shallow water environments create unique advantages for marine reptile communication systems that operate across the restricted depth ranges characteristic of epicontinental seas. Sound transmission in shallow water follows propagation patterns that optimize communication range for social coordination and territorial behavior in ways that deeper oceanic acoustic environments cannot duplicate. In this world where shallow seas breathe with the patient rhythm of geological stability, The epicontinental waters represent marine evolutionary laboratories where aquatic dinosaurs explore adaptive possibilities that oceanic environments never offer. Their gentle waves carry biological experiments that demonstrate the creative potential of evolution operating in stable, shallow marine systems. The long dream continues through geological ages where dinosaurs settle into evolutionary rhythms that could theoretically persist until the sun's eventual expansion finally ends all terrestrial possibilities, their biological systems achieving stability patterns that approach equilibrium with planetary processes operating on astronomical timescales. In this timeline where catastrophic extinction kept its distance, life explores adaptive landscapes with the patience of continental drift, each species finding its optimal niche within ecosystems that had unlimited time to achieve mathematical precision in resource distribution and energy flow patterns. The absence of sudden environmental disruption allows biological communities to develop organizational complexity that approaches theoretical limits for ecosystem stability and productivity optimization. Evolutionary stasis in many dinosaur lineages demonstrates the achievement of morphological and physiological optimization, so complete that further modification becomes unnecessary. Their body plans, representing solutions to environmental challenges so mathematically precise that natural selection finds no improvements to implement. These evolutionary plateaus, maintained across millions of years without the disruption that catastrophic change would impose, create biological systems that achieve functional perfection, approaching engineering ideals for organism-environment interaction. The resulting morphological stability represents evolutionary completion rather than evolutionary stagnation, their adaptive solutions having explored and optimized every variable relevant to their ecological requirements. Some evolutionary biologists studying this timeline would find evidence of speciation rates that approach theoretical minimums for biological diversification, the environmental stability allowing species to persist without the fragmentation and isolation events that typically drive rapid evolutionary change. These reduced speciation patterns demonstrate ecosystem maturity that approaches climax community status across entire continental scales. Their biological stability creating evolutionary landscapes where change occurs only when astronomical or geological processes introduce new environmental variables requiring adaptive response. The energy flow patterns that develop in these mature ecosystems achieve efficiency levels that approach thermodynamic optimums for biological energy transfer, their trophic relationships demonstrating mathematical precision in resource utilization that rivals the efficiency found in technologically optimized industrial systems. Primary productivity, herbivore energy conversion, and carnivore predation efficiency operate according to relationships so precisely calibrated that ecosystem energy budgets approach theoretical limits for biological system performance under stable environmental conditions. Behavioral evolution in these long-stable dinosaur communities explores possibilities that rapid environmental change never allows, their social systems and cognitive capabilities achieving complexity levels that approach those found in technological societies. Cultural transmission mechanisms, learned behaviors, and social coordination patterns develop sophistication that exceeds anything documented in our timeline's more recently evolved and temporally constrained biological systems. These behavioral achievements represent cognitive evolution operating without the interruption that environmental catastrophe imposes on cultural development processes. The atmospheric composition maintained by these mature biological systems achieves gas concentrations that represent optimal compromises between photosynthetic requirements, respiratory needs, and greenhouse warming necessary for reptilian dominance. Carbon dioxide, oxygen, and trace gas levels fluctuate within narrow ranges that support both plant productivity and animal metabolism, with efficiency that approaches ideal specifications for biological activity. These atmospheric conditions demonstrate planetary-scale biological regulation that approaches the precision found in technologically controlled life support systems. Climate stability maintained across these extended evolutionary timescales creates weather patterns that operate with predictability approaching that found in mechanical systems. Their seasonal cycles and longer-term climate variations, following astronomical rhythms with mathematical precision, that allows biological systems to achieve optimal synchronization with environmental conditions. Temperature ranges, precipitation patterns, and atmospheric circulation systems achieve stability that supports biological planning and resource management across temporal scales spanning multiple generations. Coevolutionary relationships in these mature ecosystems achieve coordination precision that approaches symbiotic perfection. Plant-animal partnerships and predator-prey interactions demonstrating adaptive coordination that represents optimal solutions to biological resource distribution and utilization challenges. These biological partnerships, refined across millions of years of mutual adaptation, create ecosystem relationships that approach the efficiency found in technological systems designed through systematic optimization processes. The geological processes that continue operating across these biological timescales create environmental changes so gradual that evolutionary adaptation maintains pace with physical environmental modification. Biological and geological systems achieving coordination that approaches dynamic equilibrium between living and non-living planetary processes. Continental drift, mountain building, and climate evolution proceed at rates that allow biological tracking of optimal environmental conditions across geographical and temporal scales that span geological ages. Population dynamics across these vast evolutionary timescales achieve demographic stability that approaches mathematical ideals for species persistence and ecosystem function maintenance. Birth rates, death rates, and population regulation mechanisms operate with precision that maintains species diversity and ecological relationships across environmental variations that operate on astronomical cycles. These demographic achievements demonstrate biological population control that approaches optimal solutions to resource limitation and competitive pressure operating across ecosystem scales. The information systems that develop in these mature biological communities achieve communication efficiency and knowledge transmission capabilities that approach those found in technological information networks. Behavioral learning, cultural transmission, and social coordination mechanisms create biological information processing systems that operate with sophistication approaching that found in designed communication systems optimized for information transfer and storage across extended temporal scales. Biodiversity patterns in these evolutionary mature ecosystems achieve species richness and ecological complexity that approach theoretical limits for biological community organization under stable environmental conditions. Species interactions, niche differentiation, and resource partitioning demonstrate ecological organization that approaches optimal solutions to competitive exclusion and resource limitation challenges operating across continental scales and geological timescales. The metabolic efficiency achieved by dinosaur populations across these extended evolutionary periods demonstrates physiological optimization that approaches biochemical limits for energy conversion and utilization under stable environmental conditions. Digestive efficiency, respiratory gas exchange, and circulatory system performance achieve functional capabilities that approach theoretical optimums for biological energy processing systems operating under optimal environmental conditions. Reproductive strategies in these mature dinosaur populations achieve demographic optimization that approaches ideal solutions to population maintenance and genetic diversity preservation across environmental variations operating on astronomical timescales. Breeding timing, offspring care, and genetic recombination patterns demonstrate biological reproductive planning that approaches the efficiency found in population management systems designed through technological optimization. The sensory systems that develop in these long-evolved dinosaur populations achieve information processing capabilities that approach theoretical limits for biological environmental monitoring and response systems. Visual, auditory, chemical, and mechanical sensory processing demonstrates neural architecture that approaches optimal solutions to environmental information acquisition and processing challenges operating across ecosystem scales. In this world where the long dream continues across geological ages without catastrophic interruption, dinosaur evolution explores every possibility that time and environmental stability can provide. The biological achievements represent the full creative potential of evolutionary processes operating without temporal constraints. demonstrating what life accomplishes when given unlimited time to perfect its relationship with planetary systems operating on astronomical timescales.